up, everybody? Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast, talking boxing history. Like always, I'm here with my dude, Aris Pina, combi box operator, but more importantly, my brother in boxing history dumb, if that's a thing, boxing historyologists or whatever. Nah, dude, we're here to talk some history inspired by current events. Aris, what's up, man?
Everything is good, man. It's been interesting week on boxing Twitter, to say the least, now that we're recording, but seems that like the fucking storm has ended a little bit, so cooler things ahead. And what I mean by that now is that we can talk boxing history instead of dealing with the ridiculousness of what has been going on. So
Yes, this is not the show for that. Perhaps, I don't know, perhaps we'll talk about it some other time or one of us will, but nonetheless, in the meanwhile, there is actual professional boxing at hand this weekend in LA. Terence Crawford moves up yet another division to try to capture his world, what's this, the lightweight, junior welterweight, welterweight. So this would be his
fourth.
fourth division, his, or at least, presumably if he wins his fourth divisional title. And I mean, yeah, so this is what we're talking about. We're talking about the best and the worst multi-division champions. I mean, probably going to be more focus on the worst just because it's fun and
Funny.
funny and whatnot. But just to be honest, but nonetheless, that's what we're talking about because that's where Terence Crawford is in his career. Who knows how much longer he's going to be fighting for, but nonetheless, dude, especially considering he's actually taken the time to consolidate the belts where he's been, in the divisions that he's been in or tried to, that's significant. And it's far more significant than kind of, as they say, cherry picking. So in any case, I mean, we can briefly talk about what you think is going to happen this weekend or your thoughts on it. But without question, Terence Crawford is one of the best fighters in the last handful of years. It's just, in my opinion, kind of tragic that he's gotten so few opportunities to prove that. Um, I mean, I've said this before on the show, said it on social media. I have followed his career since I first saw, I mean, probably a little before that, but for certain that I remember since I saw him against Brady's Prescott on the undercard of Alvarado Rios 2, I believe it was. And I was like, wow, he's very talented, very good. I liked him, followed his career, etc. But, he's been a pro since 2008 and he's fought 40 times. And while he obviously hasn't taken a ton of punishment and that part is good, it feels like we should have a good like 10 or 12 more fights out of him or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to seem like greedy, but do you know what I mean? But anyway, what do you think is Terence Crawford's mindset going into this weekend, or what do you think his chances are, etc.?
I mean, his mindset is always what his mindset's going to be. He's one of the most focused fighters I've seen in forever, and I think that's what brings him to be as
Never
successful as
seen him
he
out
is.
of shape.
Never. You know what I mean? He's one of those guys in the same discipline as Floyd Mayweather. And Mayweather is always looked upon as like the gold standard when it comes to like, being in shape and discipline and all that. But Crawford was right there with him with an even more of a nastier streak than he did than Mayweather had. By the time Mayweather got comfortable and everything like that, became consensus pound for pound number one. It was easier for him to just coast and go to decisions and put on master classes like that. Crawford still has that nasty streak in him, kind of like a Marvin Hagler or another person of the ilk where he wants to take your head off still. You know what I mean? He
Yeah,
wants to
he's got
knock you
that
up.
chip on his shoulder.
Yeah. If you hit him, he wants to get that get back immediately and get it twofold by like really beating you up. And he's gonna like, after certain points, he'll be talking shit while doing it. Like he's a nasty guy in that ring, man. A person that probably is not fun to fight in the least because not only are you getting beaten down, he's like also kind of dogging you the same way. But um, yeah, I expect him to win tomorrow night. Madrimov is a very good fighter himself. He's a very long, extensive amateur career, which you see with a lot of these guys now. It's almost like the norm. They have crazy amateur careers and they come in and they win a world title within their first, like, handful of pro fights, it seems now. And um, with the way he's been, I mean, he's a switch hitter, another guy that's really tricky. Crawford's moving up another division against a guy who's naturally big and super strong and showing that he can legitimately like knock the shit out of guys himself. I mean, yeah, it's definitely a risky fight, but a guy at Crawford's level who's basically seen everything that there is to be imagined, and a person with this type of drive who just refuses to lose or anything like that. He's just such a dominant guy, man. Like he just knows how to take command immediately. I can't see him losing tomorrow. So
1978. Leon Spinks wins the heavyweight championship in his what eighth pro fight,
Sure.
and now we're like, oh, eight, that many, huh?
Yeah.
Taking a long time. Yeah, some of these dudes from like Eastern Europe, especially Majumaz from Uzbekistan. We've seen Lomachenko, especially in recent years from Ukraine. A lot of these guys from kind of Eastern Europe area are just like cleaning it up, mopping that shit up in the amateurs, and then coming into the pros just ready, ready to go. So that's, I mean, there's something to say for that, and I think that the you might look on paper the experience gap between Terence Crawford and Madrimov, and it's not nearly what it would seem. And on top of that, however, Terence Crawford also had an extensive amateur career. It's not like he was a nobody as an amateur. He was running the circuit. And while Omaha is not necessarily these days or currently considered like a hotbed for boxing, that could change in the years to come given Crawford's reach there. But it's more competitive than one might think. And that being said, he also did national competitions and did well there. So the gap's not really what it might seem. And then, like you were saying, like the skill of Terence Crawford is high enough that the normal things that might seem like clear advantages for Madrimov, size, power, and things like that could be negated by skill. And on top of that, once more, Terence Crawford has a background in wrestling when he was younger, and you could see
Right.
that he does very good clinch work. He's not somebody who's just going to get like ragdolled. And so, you know what I mean? Like on top of that mean streak, he's skilled enough on the inside that he's not just going to get like thrown around by a bigger guy. He'd probably go out swinging, I would imagine, if anything because of that mean streak too. If he goes out, that is, and I don't expect him to go out tomorrow. I expect him to become a four division world champion. Yeah, I mean it's kind of this is also a little bit of a test of Terence Crawford's reach since becoming I mean pound for pound level or top pound for pound level with his win over Errol Spence last year, which was just about a year ago, which once again is just kind of returning to this idea that we haven't seen nearly enough of him. Not capitalizing on the win over Errol Spence, which is not his fault. And we're going to also talk about some of that today. The circumstances that a lot of these fighters have found themselves in, some of them not within their control, because it sounds like Errol Spence, just to kind of briefly get into that, they were gonna rematch, and it sounds like Errol Spence is kind of done, to be honest. I mean, I don't mean to sound like a dick, but it sounds like many of the suspicions that we had going into that fight about how damaged he could have been from his car accident, and I mean, even from getting punched after that, were probably true. And it sounds like he's not, moving forward with his career, which meant Terence Crawford was just waiting for him. And Terence Crawford's pissed about having to wait once more. So he's probably going to come into the fight with an extra chip on his shoulder because of that. But again, it's just such a shame. Wish we'd seen a little bit more of him as a pro to this point, but there's still time. There's still some time.
I mean, the fact now that he's lauded as the best pound for pound on the planet and gets that respect, and every time he's had, like, he finally got the super fight with Spence. Like, he was clamoring for some type of super fight. We had seen him in pay per view shows before, but they're
They
always just
dangled the fucking Pacquiao fight in front of him for like several. Come
yeah,
on, man.
all that feuding that he had with Bob Arum was such a weird dynamic too, because they have a fight there on ESPN. He knock a guy out, beat him up. Afterwards, he'd be like, "I want Pacquiao, I want Pacquiao, I want this one, that one." And Bob's like, we'll make it. Just have to be patient, you'll see." And even like the last one, remember when Crawford, I forgot who he stopped. I don't. Could have been Kell Brook. It could have been one of those guys. It was somebody, right? And afterwards, they're asking him, "So what's next?" And the first thing he did, he put his arms on his shoulders. He looked at Bob and just kind of gave him that look, like, "What do you think?" And Bob's
Yeah,
like,
he put him on the spot and he was just
"Yeah,
like, "So what do you fucking got to say, bro? It's on
yeah,
you."
yeah." Yeah. And then Bob's like, "He's the best fighter of the, best thing I ever promoted.
You
Better than shit."
don't
He just starts yelling.
understand. He's
Yeah.
so tough to promote. It's like we've heard that before. Remember when you were saying that about Floyd Mayweather and then he left your ass and then all of a sudden became like the biggest superstar boxing has ever seen? How do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile that you know what that doesn't make sense. And again it happened. Again it happened. Crawford broke out as soon as he got away from top.
It's pretty funny.
Not going to turn it into a top rank hate party, but come on, dude.
I
Lame.
mean, it was for the best that Crawford got out of that. Sure, he got his initial exposure from there. Like you talked about, he was a substitute when he fought Brady Prescott. And then, he impressed enough for that fight that he got brought back on soon after. Then he was being featured. And then, soon enough, he beats Ricky Burns, cleans out lightweight. I don't think he was undisputed at lightweight, right? He just kind of beat whoever's there, then moved up
Yeah,
soon.
no. Yeah, that was 140 where he was, yeah.
Yeah. But then at 140, same thing. I mean, like, the division wasn't that super deep at the time, but when he came up there, he's whooped everyone's ass. And and Dongo was one of the weakest, I would say, multi belt champions of any era. But like Crawford did what he was supposed to do with a guy like that. He didn't let him last. He knocked his ass out in 3 rounds. And then once he moved, he's finished business over there. He moves up to welterweight. It took him a longer time, obviously, because of various circumstances. Um, the promotional issue that way and everything else lining up. Once he finally was able to secure those fights, especially the Spence fight, I mean, he performed. And even before then, when he was being frustrated in fights he could have potentially lost, because any of those guys, you can think about it, like a lot of guys, um, when you're just clamoring for a big fight and you can't get it, you can get distracted. You know what I mean? You're not going to be up for certain fighters that normally, because you just think you're so much better than them, and that what am I going to do with this shit? I want a Pacquiao fight. I want this one. I don't want to fight Mean Machine. I don't want to fight Benavides or this guy or that guy. And yeah, Crawford did get hit a couple of times in this fight, especially I think it was Mean Machine that kind of dropped him, right? And but for the most part, he still got through those, did what he had to do, and that's why a lot of people sometimes kind of compare him to like a Hagler in a sense. Not so much with their fighting styles, but I mean, even though both of them are switch hitters, but like in the sense that like Crawford is just one of those guys that was going to keep on plugging. You put a guy in front of him, he'll beat him regardless if it was a big fight or not. He's just going to keep on going until he can get the recognition of being the best. That's what his main focus is that like, yeah, he'll take all the adulation and the money with it and all this shit, but his main focus is put to be number one, the best in the world, and anyone that wants to try to take that down from him, he's going to stomp you out.
And he's done a good job of it.
Yeah,
I think that there's obviously a case to be made that Alexander Usyk is the top pound for pound fighter,
in a
depending
way.
on how weird you feel about ranking heavyweights. I don't give a shit. It doesn't matter. I like to joke that you can't rank heavyweights, but I think it's just more funny. But nonetheless, it's a compelling case. But also there's an extremely compelling case for Naoya Inoue. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know why my mouth just cannot make it's like it starts saying his name and my mouth goes "Ah, blah, 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 blah." Anyway, anyway, Naoya Inoue. See, it's not so bad. There's a very compelling case for him as well as the greatest fighter around, the top pound for pound fighter. But I think a lot of people feel as though the Crawford win over Spence was so high profile, and that a guy who was most likely still pound for pound level when he beat him is a little bit better than what Usyk or Inoue have done in the last couple of years. But anyway, the argument's tight. Point is that Crawford is clearly one of the best fighters the last few years. So I expect a that level performance.
Same. I have no doubt that he will too. I'm working it tomorrow, so I mean, I'll definitely be watching.
So people know who to go after if they're not. Just
Yeah. I mean, I'm probably counting Crawford if he's the challenger of the fight. So there's that.
well, there's been plenty of going after people in the last couple days.
Most
Hopefully we
definitely.
don't add to that shit. But all right, so we're talking about multi-division champions since we're talking about Terence Crawford. But I mean, I think that you and I were probably just joking and riffing about like the worst ones. Probably, like I said, because it's the fun and funnest and the
Yeah.
funniest or whatever. But just as a disclaimer, we're not talking about necessarily the skill level of these fighters or who they are as fighters or anything like that. I think mostly we're talking about like a level of opposition. That's probably the issue with a lot of the worst multi-division champions that we're talking about here. And again, circumstances, etc. We'll go there. But who's a multi-division champion, bad or good, that you got to bring up?
I'm gonna actually start with a good one instead of bad at first, because like just you got to think about it in this way. Like in today's day and age, it's very easy, I guess, if you're an elite fighter or a high level fighter, to become a multi division champion. There's belts everywhere. You know what I mean? You
Almost
got
like expected, you know?
yeah. even if it's not like full on, it can be like just a world championship, kind of like how Tank Davis does it. It doesn't need to be the super champion or any of this shit. Like people, excuse me, people move up and down move up all the time and able to acquire belts doing that. But back in the day when there was only like 8 legitimate divisions, or even then, in that sense, when they started adding other divisions, it still was not easy to become a multi-division champion. First off, the competition was a lot stiffer regarding the divisions. And two, there just wasn't as many divisions, you know what I mean? And there wasn't as many belts. So you couldn't just go up and get a WBO or an IBF and stuff like that. For most decades, there was only like the WBA, or in that case, might be the NBA, and whatever the WBC might have been. So, speaking of that type of thing, like you got to go with, I don't know, Henry Armstrong, for instance.
I mean,
Yeah.
he's probably in terms of, multi-division champions, uh, well, perhaps tied for the greatest of all time. I don't know. I guess you could really make an argument anyway. You could split hairs however you want, but easily one of the greatest fighters who ever lived. The kind of feat of holding several titles at the same time is just something that wouldn't really be done the same way these days. Clarissa Shields is kind of trying to attempt that right now in women's boxing, which all respect due, and I do mean that, is not the same thing as holding with the level of opposition and the variety of opposition is simply not the same thing, especially going back into the 1930s and 40s, is holding several world titles at once. But also the list of fighters and just the who's who of especially lightweights and welterweights that Henry Armstrong fought is like pretty insane. And especially during a deep era, an era with a lot of talent, an era with a lot of really, really tough fighters, tough times, creating tough motherfuckers, etc. So Henry Armstrong was that guy.
I couldn't have said it better, my man. Like he was just, and he had that type of style too that was just like absolute, perpetual motion. You know what I mean? It was not a style that was like gonna be taught in any type of like gym or like really broken down. It was something all unto himself. Because Armstrong was just a straight up fighter, kind of like in the sense like Durant. Durant had his own like really sense of style that you couldn't really teach what he did, but you didn't want to fuck it up either because it worked so well for him. So you just kind of tweaked a little bit of things here and there to make sure it just enhanced it. But you left the natural product of what it was. And that's what Armstrong was. He was just a fucking machine out there. And I think also too, correct me if I'm wrong, he had a heart thing where his like heartbeat like raced like slower, I think, right, than others. So he was able to have more stamina.
I've heard that, and
Yeah.
it would make sense because the way that he fought. And I mean, that's you said perpetual motion, and a number of writers used to call him "quote unquote" little perpetual motion because he was just nonstop throwing punches or just on your ass. He was never really got out of your face. And of course, there were fighters who managed to take advantage of that and defeat him because of that. And sometimes he did have difficulty with fighters as it happens with any fighter who starts moving up divisions. Eventually, they're going to start kind of running into some brick walls. Eventually they're going to figure out what their limit is. And he got to, especially at welterweight, and started creeping up to middleweight too, but got to welterweight and figured out that some of the bigger, stronger fighters there were giving him trouble, like Fritzy Zivic, for instance. And I'm, it's disgusting record. You look at it and you're like, who's this guy? But I mean, just the guy is an underrated puncher. Number one, is a
Mhm.
very good puncher. And then just the nastiest SOB on the face of the planet, bro. And knew it and was, just kind of unrepentant about it and was like, yeah, so I
He did
laced you.
not give a fuck, bro.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
So I hit you low. What
Yeah,
do you want? It's like, he didn't give a fuck. And so, yeah, I mean, but it's understandable that that's the kind of brick wall that you run into. It's a hell of a brick wall.
sure. And when Armstrong's era, when he was coming up, bro. I mean, like first off, he loses his first pro fight. I wasn't even Henry Armstrong back then. He turns pro against and with the name Melody Jackson, which is I guess that's a fighter's name when you think about it. Because to look back at some of the names that you had back then of some guys, and everybody was a newsboy or this thing or that, or you know, I was looking at the a guy from New Bedford, for instance. His name was she fought Darcy White was his name. and he fought guys like Coco Kid and Holman Williams and others, right? But anyways, you look at some of the names that he fought on this record, and it was like Newsboy this, Backpack this guy, Mexican Pete, this one, that one, like all kinds of different random names, and same thing. So Henry Armstrong turns pro, he's Melody Jackson, he gets knocked out by a guy named Ali Ivano. And I mean, it wasn't a big deal for you to lose your first pro fight back then. I think Benny Leonard lost his first pro fight. We had a show about that, guys losing their first pro fight.
Yep.
So shit happens. But I mean, like, once he started getting into like his whole, style and like really getting like a hold of like who he was and like growing into himself, bro. I mean, like, it was hard to hold him off, though. He was a fucking menace back in his day. Like you said, there was guys that were able to beat him or sort of had his number. Like you had for instance, Baby Arismendi, I believe, right? Who in a number of fights that originally was able to beat him until like Armstrong was finally able to turn the tide. And there was other fighters. It was Arismendi, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because he talked about him also in that book, the Peter Heller book, The 40 World Champions, telling their story. So he talked about that, but like Armstrong's thing back then, what made him such an exciting fighter and what made him so popular was that, like, yeah, like when you mentioned like perpetual motion, the guy just wouldn't stop punching. Like it wasn't like a fancy Dan, nothing like that. He just came in fist blazing. You know what I mean? He wasn't wide open either with it too. Like there was some nuances to his game, but it was just such a, it wasn't, he wasn't going to go out there and beat Pernell Whitaker. Like, I mean, you would be able to hit him. Armstrong wasn't that hard to hit. But like the problem was once he got on top of you, you weren't going to get off of him. He was a hard hitter. He wasn't overwhelmingly to knock you unconscious, but he threw so much and with so much pressure and just engulfing you, you could not do anything except drown under it.
Yeah, he was more of a hitter at featherweight. Well, I mean, he
Yeah.
naturally, of course, that makes sense that a fighter would be a bigger hitter as they're in lower weight classes. But still, he hit, respectably enough that you weren't going to sit there,
Mhm.
as a welterweight. And it took some shit. It took some very good fighters to beat him. Fritzy Zivic, Lou Ambers,
Yep.
Baby Arismendi is probably a pretty underrated fighter overall. A guy who is, again, this is a thick, really deep division. And on top of that, if you go to, like, for instance, his BoxRec page, they generally do for like the major fighters a pretty good job of listing who they beat and who they, were defeated by, like in a kind of short little summary or whatever. But even so, like, it's leaving out a number of, like, a better idea might be to go to archive.org. You can go to the
Mhm.
Internet Archive and you can look up the boxing register, and it can show you, give you a better idea of what fights were against like top 10 ranked fighters. Like the boxing register is really good for that kind of stuff so that you don't have to go look up the fucking yearly ring ratings for every year or whatever. And that being said, it's like littered. His record is just like top 10, top 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10,
Yeah.
10, 10, 10, 10, 10, like all the way the fuck down. It's ridiculous.
And if you talk to fighters from that era, that was the norm back then. It was just a normal time. If you wanted to be the best, you were forced to fight other guys in the top 10. All you were trying to scramble to the top. So if you're on his BoxRec page and you look at some of the names over there, bro, like we said, he mentioned he fought Arismendi. He lost to him twice early on, and then he finally figured it out and started beating him in the subsequent rematches after that. But he fought him like a number of times, which is unheard of. Who the fuck would want to fight Baby Arismendi 4 or 5 times? And then you had Juan Zerita, you had Mike Belois, California Joe Rivers, Frankie Click. And these are dudes that Armstrong is not only defeating, but he's knocking the shit out of them too now. He's like, basically 126-pound Mike Tyson at this point. And by the time he finally fights Petey Sarin for the featherweight championship, I mean, like, he's as ready as it was ever going to be. And Sarin was one of those guys, a very respectable guy too, like a champion from the 20s and 30s. I mean, a fighter from the 20s and champion in 30s and stuff, but like one of those dudes who, like, he was already a little bit past that, I think, right? You know what I mean? A little bit longer in the tooth and ready to be taken. And
He
that's
was
what
like Bobo
Armstrong
Olson, dude. He looked like he was 55 when he was like 19.
or Marcel Till, the middleweight from
Yeah. And
bald.
motherfuckers were aging on a different time
Yeah,
back then
man,
too.
like I'm not, that's they have that weird, like we talked about Johnny Paycheck on another show. They have that like the hairline
Little
is
tuft of
really
hair,
long.
and it's like, bro,
Yeah,
you're
with this
you're
one tuft
23.
all around, and they're just covered in body hair, looking like George the Animal Steel.
Yeah, fools are like working the mines at 11 years old or something. I don't know
Mhm.
what's going on, but yeah, Petey Sarin was one of those dudes.
And a hell of a good fighter, but Armstrong absolutely thrashed him when he fought him. I mean, it was just a straight beatdown.
Yeah, he's a rugged little dude and got his ass
Yeah.
kicked.
And no shame in that. But I mean, once Armstrong became featherweight champion, all roads were ahead. And so when we were talking about again, this is about multi-division champions. Thing that Armstrong did that was just kind of like holy shit was that not only normally, especially back then, if you're featherweight and you want to make the leap to another champion, another division, if you want to win a title, you go to the next division up. You know what I mean? Armstrong was like, fuck that, I'm gonna go to welterweight, which is nuts in a sense because like he was weighing around, I mean, 126, 130, depending on where he was fighting. But like to go from there to potentially jump up 15, 16 pounds to fight not only, the welterweight champion, but one of the greatest fighters of all time in Barney Ross is like, if that happened today, people would just be like, holy fuck, you know what I mean? That would be like Tank conceivably moving up to fight, I don't know, Crawford. If Crawford was still a welterweight.
Yeah, Ross, who himself was a multi-division champion, although with the junior divisions and stuff like that, they had a weird relationship with the junior divisions in boxing back in the day. But nonetheless, I certainly would count him. But still, yeah, jumping up to face a guy who was a super classy boxer puncher like Ross,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, people be going nuts about that type of shit today.
It was. I mean, yes. Now, this is another one where Barney Ross at this point had a long, long career. He was at the end of it. He was still the welterweight champion, but I mean, Ray Arcel talked about it a long time, and many others have said the same thing that like Ross was at the end of his rope at this point. So Armstrong was his absolute prime. Ross wasn't, and Ross wasn't an insanely big guy himself either. And I mean, like, yeah, I said it's like 147, but nobody really weighed it at the limit like that back then. They were always a little bit under or some shit. But regardless, at as Ross is one of the classiest fighters of all time. You could easily put him in the top 10 of the greatest fighters that ever lived. And he's one of those guys that even though he's fought like his career, his span like goes back over 90 years now, which is incredible. His style holds up. If you watch him, it's still as modern as can be. Like it's beautiful to watch. In fact, I love watching Barney Ross. But yeah, you weren't going to stop a rampaging Armstrong, and Ross already being long in the tooth with a long career was not going to stop rampaging Armstrong, and he got his ass kicked.
Yeah, really, really badly, like almost didn't finish the fight. But basically they allowed him to finish because of who he was and his stature in the sport. People were calling like, fucking stop it. And they're like, let the guy go with his dignity, which is crazy in and of itself because he fought what, 80 something times or nearly 80 something times. And then still on top of that would go on to be a World War II fucking hero,
Yeah,
go on to get hooked on drugs.
morphine
And
and stuff. I think right. Yeah,
yeah. And I mean, kick that habit, which even just that alone is like fucking crazy. Not everybody does that shit.
sure.
Yeah, wild. And he didn't live a super long life either, but I mean, he lived a lot.
Yeah, he lived a hell of a life, but like you said, he didn't live a long life because I think he was a chain smoker too, which obviously coming out of the
Yeah,
war
I
and
don't think he
being
was.
being the time period of what it was, that's not unusual in itself. So all that caught up to him. But um that with that fight, I'll just leave it at this. Armstrong beat him so bad that Ray Arcel talked about it again in his book and in his book and other interviews that Arcel was Ross's trainer for a long time. He had some really cool stories about him for different fights, but he said the Armstrong one, Ross got beat so bad that they tried to stop it many times. They asked him, "Yo, we're gonna stop the fight," and Ross is like, "Do not." If he was like, "If you stop this, I will never talk to any of you again. Like, let me finish on my feet with dignity." And I don't think Ross was ever stopped in his career, correct?
I don't think so. Which
Yeah.
is why fought Jimmy McLarnin,
Yes.
Armstrong. I mean, dude, that's fucking
Tony
wild.
Cansberry, like, yeah. And so Seferenio Garcia, but he so he got beat bad, like really, really bad. And after the fight, like Arcel said that and this is the mark of a true trainer. Arcel said he brought Ross to the back and he brought him immediately like to the hotel room or whatever it was, and he locked his wife out. And he said that Barney Ross's wife was banging on the door, screaming murder, trying to get in to see him. And Arcel said he wouldn't let him because he didn't want his wife to be able to see him as bad as he was. He just needed to rest. And Arcel said that he nursed him for like 2 days straight. He said he slept with him, he laid there, he just put towels on him, did this, did that, like fed him, did all this crap, and just made sure he like when finally he felt that like he was looking a little bit better, then he allowed him to see his wife again. That's how
Jesus,
bad of a
man.
beating Henry Armstrong put on him.
Well, I mean, yeah, no, it not. I was gonna say I believe it, but I believe it because it's true. That
Yeah,
shit's
yeah.
factual. Man, yeah. It's truly crazy. Henry Armstrong, and that was more or less kind of like the start of all of it too. He went won the welterweight championship. Well, not the very start of it, but the start of his kind of multi-division uh run in 1938, 1939, 1940. The kind of stuff that he did is just legendary. We're still talking about it 85 years later. Um, there was that little stat, like I said, BoxRec does a great job right here that says from December 1936 to October 1940, 59 1-1 with 51 knockouts.
That's insane.
That's a career right there.
Yeah.
And
That
like
is
a good career. Like that's like a long, full career these days.
And those are the type of numbers that the all-time greats from that era were doing. Like Robinson running his record up to like 40 and 0 or so before losing his first fight to Lamada, and then running it up after that to like 96-1 or some crazy shit. Willie Pep having his record, same thing, only losing one fight in over 100 at that point. Like incredible records, but these again justified because these guys were absolute kings amongst their eras.
So moving from Henry Armstrong then and just kind of doing a smooth transition here.
Sure.
I'll bring up an easy one because it's somebody who fought somewhat recently and their career has been in recent years. He's easy to kind of make fun of with all due respect. Not totally because we're going to make fun too. But Adrien Broner. Again,
Absolutely.
he comes up prominently in the conversation because he's a recent multi-division champion and he's also, a loudmouth. So he's easy to single out for that reason. But the reason why I say a smooth transition from Henry Armstrong to Adrien Broner is because people are going to say, so what? Adrien Broner's what is he, a 4 division champion now? And he's at least 3, but I can't even keep track because it's so nonsensical. You said it earlier, with the way the alphabet organizations are now, I don't keep track. I don't know who champions are apart from like real champions at this point because there's so many interim belts, silver belts, like there are these different iterations of quote unquote normal belts and there are already fucking 4. So you start branching out from there. I can't do it. I'm in my 40s. I can't do it. It's too much. I can't remember it all. So that being said, you also said earlier it's a lot easier to pick up a lot of these trinkets and baubles and shit. So the point being, though, with the comparison between these two is that the times being different means that the fighters of today, especially,
Mhm.
simply don't have a chance at touching those kinds of records. It has nothing to do with me hating Floyd Mayweather. Like I've never been a big fan, but I'm not just like, fuck him. I'm going to rate him low because I don't like him.
Mhm.
It's more just that like we just said, Henry Armstrong, 59 1-1 over the course of fucking not even a little over 3 years, or it's literally a little under 4 years. Sorry. And it takes Floyd Mayweather from 1996 to 2017 or whatever that he fought Conor McGregor to not even reach that number of fights. And it's simply just an issue of, and again, we can talk about why and all that stuff. Some people could say, "Oh, they fought that much because they were badasses." Like, yeah, to some degree, but they fought that much because they needed the money because they didn't get paid shit for a fight. Like, they got paid like a couple grand. And when you're traveling around for every fight and all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, money to live, that money goes quickly. So you have to fight all the time. And there wasn't the kind of equality or like looking out for fighters type of shit that there is now. There isn't shit now either, but there was even less then. So these fighters had to fight that much. Obviously, it's a good thing that progress has been made in that regard, that fighters don't have to fight every other week. That's good. I don't want fighters getting their shit kicked in and then fighting 10 days from now. That's not good. But as far as the glory, as far as the fucking accomplishments, they just can't touch these kinds of records. That's it. Beyond that, people can't accept that. I'm not arguing it anymore. Back to Adrian Broner. We were talking about good amateurs. people can say Adrien Broner didn't get opportunities or he was grew up in a bad area. Both of those things are true to an extent. However, that dude's been in the gym since he was a kid, and he's been in good gyms. He's been in high quality gyms with high quality amateur programs in Ohio that people might say, Ohio, what, dude? Nah, no. Cleveland and Cincinnati actually do have pretty thick boxing programs in the amateurs. They have in recent years anyway, and since the 2000s for sure. There are photos of Adrien Broner in the gym when he was like in his single digits with what's his name, Ricardo Williams Jr. So I
Mm.
mean, like, we're talking about people who have experience. Ricardo Williams Jr., as much of as he was a bust as a pro, was another high level amateur who had a lot of experience. So Adrien Broner started with, the right on the right foot or whatever. And he's sure when he was 130 pounds and 135, he looked like he was going to be something. I mean, to me, he did. The his style of being kind of like an aggressive counterpuncher, I like that style. Like that's the kind of like a super middleweight James Toney when he was in
Mm.
shape. I like that style. That's a fun style, good skilled style. He just could not keep himself out of trouble, and he fucked up his own opportunities. Adrien Broner, James Toney too to some extent, but Adrien Broner for sure.
Yeah, when Broner first came on the scene, like you said, he had an extended amateur career and he was around good company. Like you mentioned, the aforementioned Ricardo Williams Jr. Like that dude was supposed to be a pound for pound great at one point. Like
Yeah,
the
people
amount
don't
of
remember, man.
oh man, like the amount of hype that came out of the Olympics with him was insane. Like people forget, I don't know if they remember or not, but Lou DiBella, after the 2000 Olympics, he kind of did the same thing that main events did in 1984. In the 84 main event, signed practically the entire 84 Olympic team right off the jump. You know what I mean? All the good guys off of that. And when DiBella, and then they had their pro debut at MSG. DiBella did the same thing. He took all the guys from the 2000 Olympic team because he had just left HBO and he got that bonus from that and all this other money, so he was able to spend it. He picked up all those guys from the 2000 Olympics and then had them turn pro at MSG just like, they did in 84. And Ricardo Williams was supposed to be a centerpiece. You know what I mean? When he was interviewed in magazines talking about it, Lou was like, Ricardo Williams is going to go down as an all-time great. People are going to say, remember the name Ricardo Williams and blah, 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 blah. Obviously, like you said, it fell apart for various reasons. But Broner was around him, and Broner was also around the other Olympian, Ralph C. Warren, who was like the
Yep.
biggest Olympian from the U.S., three-time Olympian, in fact. So that's good company. I mean, those are guys that was mentoring him and stuff like that. So Broner never makes the Olympics, but like he has such a decorated amateur career that he turns pro with a lot of hype and praise and stuff. Um, I wasn't following him early on enough, but I knew, I saw him mentioned in a couple of magazines here and there, so I knew who he was. And then at one point, it was when Boxing After Dark was happening, and they were starting to feature more and more of the PBC guys. Well, back then it wasn't PBC, just Al Heyman fighters, but they're all affiliated with Golden Boy. And remember when Golden Boy basically was just trying to like take HBO and just do all their shows and kick everyone else off the network. They were featuring some of these guys. So Broner gets put in. He was supposed to fight Ponce de Leon, Daniel Ponce de Leon, and I remember being exciting for that fight because, like you said, Broner was an aggressive counterpuncher. The clips I'd seen of him, he looked really good and looked like a guy that was going to mesh well with De Leon. And De Leon had the type of style that Broner probably could have excelled and looked really well in. So he gets into the ring. He does the whole, Aaron Pryor is in there with him for support because they're both from Cincinnati and all that. And I was like, all right, man, this looks great. And then he lays a fucking egg. You know what I mean? In that fight, like it wasn't good at all. We've
A
all
lot of
watched it.
people, myself included, thought Ponce de Leon won that fight.
So did I. I was working that one, and I don't remember who I was doing punch zone for, but I remember
Yeah,
thinking
Broner got a gift.
that. Yeah. But to his credit, he comes back to HBO, and when he comes back, he actually does look spectacular. He knocked the shit out of Jason Litzow, which was impressive. Um, and I don't know, I think he might have fought somebody else. But then when he fights for his first world title, I mean, that was just a gimme. That's what I mean. This is what we're talking about when it comes to these titles and people winning them stuff. Because when Broner wins this belt, I don't remember who even fought for that one. It was for the junior lightweight title, the WBO version. It was against a guy. I'm not sure if he was even a substitute or not, but no one ever heard of him. And I don't think anyone ever heard of him again after this fight. And Broner did what he was supposed to do. He crushed him in like 3 rounds. But he looked really good early on, though, for that moment. because I mean, like, yeah, competition wasn't top flight, but he was doing what he was supposed to do. That guy Eloy Perez, was that his name?
Yep.
He had a lot of hype around him. I know Dougie
Yep.
Fisher was really hyping him,
A
and
lot of
others.
people, yeah, a lot of people picked him to beat Broner. I remember that.
They did. I remember that in the California area. A lot of people were really going with it. And Broner looked really impressive in that
That's how
fight.
it goes. They see some fool in the gym in California and they go, "Oh, that guy." That's how it always goes.
Is that how it is? Yeah, dude.
100%.
But no, man. I mean, Perez wasn't a bad fighter, but Broner made him look bad, man. Like that was to his credit, bro. That was one of Broner's best performances in my opinion. He did what he wanted to do in 4 rounds, and then
Yeah.
when he finished him, he finished him. Like it was really impressive. So wins that one, then but you start seeing like the sloppiness come in too because he fights Vicente Escobedo and he comes in way overweight, refusing to lose all this other bullshit, and just becomes a whole scene. And then again, he moves up to lightweight and he's still winning, but it's still just kind of like, all right. But I mean, you see the potential there, but I mean, at this point now, he's starting to believe in his own bullshit. It certainly doesn't help out that Ring Magazine ranks him the fucking number 5 on the pound for pound rankings to enhance that. And he's also making decent money too. And he's like starting to believe that he's Floyd. Like he's not even close to Floyd yet, but he's thinking because he's starting to get some $1 million paydays. Now he's a 2 division champion because he moved up and beat that dude from Mexico. What was his name?
Antonio DeMarco? Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Antonio DeMarco also was another guy who had some hype behind him going into the Valero fight. And
Yeah.
then Valero wound up beating the shit out of him, and that was bad. But yeah, like that was I think you hit the nail on the head, dude. A lot of it was that Broner right around that time started buying into his own hype, yeah, but also kind of like getting sucked into like the social media
Yeah.
circus and the attention that he was getting for being a stupid ass goofball. And
Because money that he was touching, he wasn't touching previously. So he felt that he was at that point, it was easy for him to just do what he wanted.
yeah,
You know
he
what I
was
mean?
a
Then
ready-made superstar.
yeah, so he starts doing these fucking exploits of him like going to, when he flushed money down the toilet, which had a lot of people in an uproar, kind of funnily.
Motherfucker is threatening to fucking contact Secret
Yeah.
Service.
I remember that. Remember when he was in Walmart and they tried to give him change? He was like, I don't need no change. I'm AB. And he throws it in the air and just
And
goes strong.
people just trying to get their groceries on the
Yeah.
fucking rollback are just like, AB what?
Or, one of my favorites is when he's walking
Normal
around
people
with
who
his
don't
crew.
watch boxing.
Absurd. Or when he's walking around with his crew and he's going to like a watch store and one of his, lackeys is like videotaping, yo, man, how much is that watch? And the owner's there smiling because he knows he's about to get got. Like he knows he's about to get paid. He's like $1.3 million with this like smiling, like, I know what I have right here. This guy's an idiot. And then Broner they look at Broner. Again, this is still Broner as like lightweight champion. He isn't really making Floyd money yet, but he's spending it like he is. And then Broner goes, yeah, wrap it up, I'll take it. And then that dude over there, like you just see like fucking the guy's head is about to explode in happiness, the owner, because he's just like, the fuck? You kidding me? Like, hell yeah. So this is what he was getting into. And so like his skills were starting to suffer because of it, like his overall, performances. Because here's the thing. Floyd, yes, was getting flashy and acting ridiculous and doing all this other bullshit. But like we talked about before, when it comes to discipline, there was no one more disciplined than Floyd. He was still in the gym constantly. I mean, all those things of him waking up at 3 a.m. and going for a 10-mile run or something, that wasn't for a show. That was just him doing what he did normally. You know what I mean? Like he was always so paranoid about actually losing that he always wanted to keep himself in top shape to do it. Like he put the work in. Broner just thought that he had the natural talent and that it would just always stay like that. And he never wanted to put the work in, and it started fucking with him. And then, before you know it, now he's forced to go up to fight Paulie, and that was the first time everyone's just like, man, like he didn't look good in that fight. I worked that. I was there at Barclays that night. And that was not a good fight. That whole card actually sucked. You had that fight, you had the rematch between Jonathan Banks and Seth
Seth
Mitchell.
Mitchell.
Ugh. I think Sakio Bika was on that card. It was not a good card. Anyways, regardless, that was just a bad fight. You know what I mean? And Broner barely edges by Paulie in that one. Makes an ass of himself afterwards. And then the Maidana fight happens.
Yeah, and it pretty much just went downhill from there. However, Still got to talk about the Maidana fight because of how fucking.
So
Oh
before
man,
that fight, did you think that Maidana was going to win, or did you think that Broner was going to win that?
I remember thinking that Maidana was going to win, but being really nervous. Not like because I was necessarily a big like. It was more just that like I really didn't want to see Broner win that shit. Because if
Yeah.
Broner win that shit, we would never fucking hear the end of it, dude. Like, and that was mostly just what I did. Because there was like dude, there was funny shit about Broner at the time, bro. Like the whole like his dad stepping in, brushing his
Oh
hair,
yeah, I shouldn't say yeah.
and then like pretending like he was gonna propose to his girlfriend and then giving her the brush to brush his hair or some shit like that. I mean, dude, shit was pretty funny. And he's like I said, a goofball. But unfortunately, dude, there was also like a really dark part to this where he was like strong arm fucking robbing people at bowling alleys,
Yep.
or he was fucking, beating family members, or, getting fucking cops calling on him because he's threatening people at like a store. The kind of fucking megalomaniac type of shit. Like Floyd did that kind of shit too. But like, at a certain point, he left the vast majority of that shit behind, I would imagine, because he realized that his money became too important to fucking risk for that type of petty shit. But
1,000%.
that's what Broner never got to. He never got to that level where like, yeah, you're making money, but now you got to protect that money, dude. You can't
Mhm.
just go out and fucking do, whatever thug shit you want to do. Like this ain't stop going back. And dude, Floyd would publicly say that. He'd be like, you got to stop hanging out with the people you're hanging out with, etc. And Broner and his drunk stupid ass would be like, fuck Floyd.
Yeah,
It's like, bro, like what the
all the
fuck are
time,
you
man.
doing?
And he thought, and double down and triple down on his bullshit. I thought that Broner would win that fight only because I was basing it off of seeing Maidana look like absolute ass against Devin Alexander.
Oh yeah, it
And
was bad.
uh who else did he lose to? Like got outboxed by? Not
He
Khan.
um he
Like
lost to Zab Jute.
not
No,
Zab. No, no,
no, no.
no.
I'm sorry. That was
That was
Matisse. No, he
yeah.
lost to Now I
Maybe it
gotta
was
look.
Khan.
Yeah, I
Oh
can't. Yeah. Amir Khan, and I remember he lost to Andrei Kotelnik. I thought he won that fight, but
yeah.
Kotelnik was actually a good fighter for a couple minutes there. But yeah, he had lost to Amir Khan and Kotelnik.
And then Devin Alexander.
Yeah.
And he looked bad in that fight. Like he just looked slow, ponderous, and Alexander kind of did what he wanted with him, which in retrospect is a bad loss, but whatever. So I just thought that Broner would just be able to figure out a way to, even if it's kind of rough, he'd win. But I mean, nah, like that's still how many years has it been? It's still one of the most memorable days on for boxing Twitter ever.
Oh
Just
man.
what happened.
Yeah, dude, like people were going absolutely ape shit, as they should have been, because Broner talked an immense amount of shit. Some people will say, well, he made it to the end, or he toughed it out. Like, not really, bro. He tried to get Maidana DQ'd like several times. He was trying to foul his way out of the fight. That's not I'm not giving kudos for that shit, bro. And then on top of that, hit him late in the fucking, what was it, right at the end of the 11th, and like stung the shit out of Maidana, almost stopped him. It's like,
Try to
I'm not.
dry hump him at one point.
Yeah, and then got that shit back. But man, yeah, that was not a good performance, and there wasn't too much brave about that from Broner, if you ask me. And
No.
clearly, that was the point at which it was like, really downhill for him. And his weight issues continued too. Like, dude kept appearing on like live Instagram live streams, like with a fat gut, looking like me and shit. It's like, bro, come on. Everybody's calling him like mini Rick Ross and shit. Remember?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there's a video of him recently with Rick Ross, and they look just like twins. It's pathetic. And then, so he lost. He beats Paulie. I think he vacated the belt. I don't even think he defended it. Right? He moves down, or did he lose it to Maidana? That's what it was, right?
Yeah, he lost it to
Defended it
Maidana.
against Austin to Maidana. Yeah. And then after he loses it to Maidana, he moves down again, and that's when he picked up a junior welterweight belt against I don't know that guy whose name I can't pronounce, but it's one of those things too that's like, all right, he beats him, but I mean, like you said, he's whatever was there before is clearly gone. Like he's just mentally not the same guy, and his performances are definitely suffering from it. Like he's now, he's like fighting like during this time too. Like this was when PBC was like starting to like break out, like actually start forming, and they were gonna like take over where they were gonna like have free boxing for all, as they called it, and it was like gonna be on every fucking network that you even know which one you're gonna turn on to watch. And Broner was gonna be one of the featured guys on that at that point, right? It was like him, Thurman, and a bunch of other ones. And like when he got on that shit again, man, it was just like they just weren't inspired performances. Every time he was featured on a show, there just was not anything good about it. He just would fight these and rarely score knockouts, and otherwise it would just be like really boring, sloppy decisions. Where like the first
He
PBC,
honestly degraded.
yes, 1,000%. Like the first PBC show that they had, the one that had Guerrero Thurman as the main event. He was the opening fight on that shit, I think, right? Didn't he fight John Molina or somebody?
Yeah.
And that was a big platform for him. That was a big event. People were like, "Oh man, this is like the first network TV boxing thing in a long time," and these names and all that. And Broner laid a fucking egg again. He did absolutely
and
nothing.
and and they laid that out for him. Like that's
Yeah,
the exact type of style. Like, dude, all respect to John Molina Jr. He's super fucking hittable. Like, dude, he's got like zero defense. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? Like, he's not. He's a good puncher, but like he'd already gone into there with like 4 or 5 losses or whatever. That they laid it out for Broner to have a big performance and set himself up, and he just like held and boxed and held his way to a decision.
exactly. Like it was really bad. And then any other time he won, it would look bad too. And then by the time it was almost like he was forming in, like we talked about this before, he was kind of forming into Camacho, except that like Camacho still would not allow himself just to like peck and box his way to boring decisions against guys who didn't belong in there with him.
Like, yeah,
Like,
he at least like flurry or something.
yeah, yeah, like if some dude didn't belong there with him, if he was fighting on USA or something like that, he'd take them out within at least 6 rounds. Do something. Like Broner was just pecking and poking against guys who had no business being in there with him. And like you said, that he was just regressing and regressing. So anytime he stepped up subsequently after that, he would lose. And the losses became more and more wide every time he would step up. Like the Sean Porter loss, that was a relatively close fight, and he dropped Porter in the last round. So that would mean obviously that would give him some saving grace and like get him more subsequent dates. But each time he would step up, he'd lose much more convincingly than the last time. Like Mikey Garcia beat him from pillar to post. He barely was competitive in that fight. He fights a draw with Jesse Vargas in a fight that he clearly should have won that, because again, like, why are you fighting a draw with Jesse Vargas? No disrespect to Jesse Vargas in terms of being a good fighter, but like there's levels there,
Yeah, but
and
outside the ring, definite
oh yeah, fuck
disrespect
that.
to that
I have
fucking
nothing. I
guy.
have nothing
Like,
to say. Yeah, I ain't talking about that. This is strictly to do inside the ring. That's why I
yeah,
said
fuck
it.
that fucking guy.
So
Go
I
ahead.
said inside the ring. But like, anyways, Broner had no business fighting a draw with someone like that. You know what I mean? And then like, and again, he just loses anytime he would just kind of step up. The Pacquiao fight was absolutely embarrassing. He didn't even deserve
And
that in
he's
the first.
claiming he won that fight. Like, what is he saying? Y'all know I beat that boy, and it was like,
Oh, I mean, don't get me wrong. That post fight
stop
interview
it.
just made me laugh because it's pretty fucking funny. The way he goes, the way he yells at Jim Gray, "Get your motherfucking ass over here! I got a lot to say." That's funny. And
he's
Jim Gray
he's
comes over.
objectively a dude.
Yeah.
I've seen interviews like, and when he's not being an absolute fucking like idiot, like because
Mm-hmm.
he dials it up for
Oh,
effect. You know what I mean? Like he's getting attention and he likes the attention. When he's not doing that, he's actually pretty engaging, pretty funny. He's not that much of an idiot, but he cannot help himself from being an idiot. So therefore, he is an idiot. But it's like, fuck, dude, he is objectively funny in some of these interviews, but then he calls him over and then he just goes on a rant about how he won. And it's like,
mhm.
no.
But you're absolutely right. I met him in Detroit one time, long, long time ago. I think before a Showtime card or something. And he was really nice, like you said, nice, engaging. We took a photo together. We were chatting for a minute about stuff, and he was just cool as shit. Like he looked like a guy you wanted to like be cool with because he seemed like a genuinely nice guy. But then it's just like you said, the outside demons and things going on, and like Broner, when you look at him, man, it's like night and day. That like the Broner that first came on the scene looks like it could be one of his kids now because he's aged so much in the face, man. It's really bad. Like the guy just, when people can't control their outside demons or really can't control whatever life that they're trying to live, and it consumes them. You can't help it. Like Broner is not as bad as Leon Spinks was. I don't think anybody as bad as Leon Spinks was when it really comes down to it. You know what I'm saying? But it's the same kind of circumstances where you just can't. Anytime you're just like, bro, grow the fuck up enough. Like you can't just keep on doing this. You squandered everything. You still find a way to keep on doing it. And then look at this latest example now, because like this dude at one point was looked upon, and don't go by what I'm saying, don't go by Chuck Jampa's fucking pound for pound ratings and putting Broner there garrulously. But I mean, like he was looked upon as a future pound for pound great. And like you could see that back then. The potential was there, man. Like you said, the aggressive boxer, the aggressive counterpuncher that he was, the whip reflexes, everything. He was fun to watch back then. I enjoyed watching him, even though he was obnoxious. But like you had to appreciate what you saw. And it's sad to see how he just regressed and he wrote it and all that. I mean, it's all entirely his fault, but like still to see that type of potential wasted is just like, oof. And that's why now,
Yeah.
man, which shouldn't have been the case, but clearly is, he might be the worst multi-division champion in boxing history.
Yeah, again, nothing to do with his talent or even skill level, because at his best, he showed that both were worthy. But I mean, with all due respect to Blair Cobbs, he's not the kind of guy that a top level fighter at all, whoever was a top
Yeah.
fighter, should really be losing to or getting knocked down by and tooled around by and whatnot. And then again, it just has to do with the opposition, dude, and who he won belts against, who he defended him against. Not a super good resume in that regard.
Million percent. And on top of that shit, you have it where it's like you know how sad it was for it. Think about that before that fight. Like they're in Don King's old office, or all kinds of like knickknacks and other weird shit that's just kind of rummaged in there.
His
King said
jar of
that,
candy.
yeah, it's jar candy because just that's what old people do. And
Yeah.
you just see Broner and Cobbs yelling at each other and just going crazy, and Broner yelling about his nails and just being the same. It's it's bad. The man's never going to make the Hall of Fame. He's not going to do this. He's not going to do that. His
He was
fans can
going
still
on
do
about
it.
he was going on about how he killed somebody. And
Oh
I'm
yeah,
like,
him and Don are killers. That's right.
dude, why are you telling on yourself? What the fuck are you doing? But that's where we are. That's where we are with Adrien Broner, that he's telling on himself in pre-fight hype about people he killed. Nice. So
Yeah.
yeah, I agree, dude. If I were to make a list of the worst, he'd definitely be up there.
Yeah. And I have no problem saying that, man. Like he wasn't a bad fighter back in his day. In fact, he was extremely talented. He just squandered everything he had a chance to do, just like others before him. I mean, this is boxing. Everybody squanders their opportunity sometimes in some way, but like he just did it in a more like train wreck fashion. And because of social media and everything like that, it was for the world to see, you know.
100%.
When everyone's saying that Broner might be the worst, and everyone's like, "Oh, Broner's not the worst four division champion or multi division champion ever." It's this next guy I'm going to bring up, and that's Leo Gamez, who I don't think is the worst in Broner. When it comes down to it, if you look at resume to resume, his is better than Broner's. I'm sorry. Broner probably fought the more high quality names because Gamez was a guy that started at fucking 105 and like made it up to like, I don't know, 118 by his career ended. But if you really put them and look at them and try to analyze what was going on, Gamez did better at a higher level than Broner ever did.
Well, and especially when you take into consideration the quality of opposition,
Yeah.
um, it's tough, and I get it, especially for American fight fans and American, the American fans who would even get to this. American fans who are even remotely concerned about like the level of opposition down in the 105, 108, uh, pound divisions. There aren't a lot of us, that's for sure. But and that's, I think, also contributes a lot to the idea, like, oh well, Gamez was easily one of the worst multi-division champions of all time. I don't think that he's one of the best, but
No.
he probably does get underrated because of the divisions that he fought in, and because of the lack of American and European, well, I mean white, I guess, fucking opposition and fighters in the division. So they're not nearly as followed, which sucks. But nonetheless, yeah, he's definitely one of the fighters who gets named quickly.
And I get it. Like, being from Venezuela and the fact that the WBA is based in what, like Panama, I think.
Oh shit. That's a good question.
Where's the WBA based out of?
Are they Venezuela?
I don't know.
Damn, we're gonna have to. All right, we're gonna have to look this
Check.
up now. World Boxing Association location.
Yeah.
Okay, Panama City. So you're
Okay.
right.
So Panama. I mean, close enough. Like, a lot of people said that they felt like Gamez got, like some Latin American fighters got like preferential treatment for being WBA champions. I mean, look, by the time he turned pro and strictly fighting in Venezuela, he was not fighting a who's who of anybody back then. I'm sure, like, the dearth of talent, especially at that type of weight, because Gamez started at 105, was not high. But regardless, you can't choose who's going to be put in front of you back then. He ends up winning a world title in 1988, the vacant WBA strawweight championship, which I assume was probably their inaugural champion for that one. And from there, has a defense, and then this is what I mean by I say better resume than Broner. When 1990 rolls around, he fights a legitimate Hall of Famer and Myung Woo Ya, one of those guys who's one of the best junior flyweight champions in history, one of the best Korean fighters in history, an absolute marvel in the ring, who had broken records at that point and just been around a very long time. And he fights him to a split decision in their first fight in Korea, no less.
Easily one of the greatest fighters of the junior flyweight division. Some would
Yeah.
say the greatest. And not only fought him close once, but twice in two
Mhm.
different fights. I know one of them used to be up on YouTube. I couldn't tell you
They're both
now.
up there. I saw that because I watched the other one the other day trying to get ready for this. So yeah,
We're sick. We're absolutely sick.
it's a really
But
good fight too. But like, yeah, to hold a guy like Yo, who was such a dominant champion to a split decision back then, it was like shows you that. I mean, to get an automatic rematch too immediately afterwards is like pretty impressive. Like, not many people were able to hang with Yo back then. So in that case, I mean, the thing was already kind of set after this with his career, more or less. He'd had interim, like terms where he just fight, a couple of non-title fights, but almost the rest of his career, he was really in the picture.
yeah, dude. And especially you're looking at 33-0 Yum Young Woo against Leo Gamez at that point was like something like 20-0, which for those divisions is like that's basically unheard of.
Sure.
And I'm not, it has to do with money and exposure, right? So
Hmm.
keeping a fighter undefeated, there's a certain amount of capital involved in that. Not only, it takes money to keep a fighter undefeated, but also with the promise that there would be more money later on. And if there's not money invested, you know what I'm saying? Like it's the similar issue with women's boxing, where and I know I'm not I swear to God I'm not going to get into a tangent here, but similarly with women's boxing, you hear people say like, yeah, well, it's not as popular, it doesn't bring in as much money, therefore X, Y, or Z. But yeah, dude, there's not the same amount of money being invested into it either. So how do you fucking know? It's not an apples to apples comparison. Similarly with the smaller divisions, they're not getting the same opportunities. There's not the same type of money being invested into light flyweight boxing as there is heavyweight boxing, obviously. And so it takes a lot more effort for a fighter to be undefeated over the series of 12, 16, 20, 30 fights. It just doesn't happen to the same degree. The opposition's different at that point. But anyway, long story short, they met undefeated. And again, Gamez was able to hold him close twice in Korea twice too. And some might be pointing that and saying, 1990, that's 2 years after the scandal 1998 with Roy Jones Jr. and Park Sai-hun at the Olympics, which hey, we're talking about Olympic scandals earlier. Woohoo, let's bring this shit full circle, baby. But yeah, man. Leo Gamez. I mean, especially that's it. When you look on paper, you're like, oh wow, that's a fucking lot of red on his BoxRec ledger there. Against actually good fighters, though.
But look at the longevity. All right, you got to look at too the longevity. Like he becomes junior flyweight champion, makes a few defenses over there, and then ends up losing it. Um, no big deal to him because soon enough, like he moves up after a couple of months, and then like loses a couple of more title fights. But by the time in 1999, he fights Hugo Soto. Hugo Soto is one of those other type of guys too that had been around a long time, lost to Johnny Tapia and others, but was able to win a flyweight title. Now, At this point, think about it. Like he had already been a 2 division champion. He won a belt at strawweight, won a belt at junior fly. Now he's fighting for the WBA flyweight title. And this was buried deep, deep, deep on the undercard of I believe the first Lennox Lewis Evander Holyfield fight. Like the only people in the arena that time were probably the trainers, the inspectors, a doctor, and like maybe a janitor. I don't even know if Don was there, but he knocks out Soto, and that's for a guy that like won his first world title as a think about this in such a small division, winning your first world title in 1988 and then regaining another title in 1999, 2 divisions up is a long fucking time for longevity. That's really impressive, regardless of how you want to look at the competition. And he made a defense there. And then we've talked about this fight too. In late 99, he fights this guy from Thailand, Sorpachai. I always fuck up his name. Can you say it?
It's a serious name,
Yeah,
Sornpache Kradending Jim.
there you go. And that, by all accounts, I know I've seen it once, but that fight was a barn burner. One of those back and forth.
It should be on YouTube. If it's
Yeah.
not, I still have it. But that's just a sleeper, bro.
Yes, definitely. Especially for like the late 90s, early 2000s. That was a fight that would be like, trade material. And it also got Pratiding Jim. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's the fight that got him to Eric Morel on HBO, because that was such a good fight, and Morel was trying to become a champion. He was the number one contender. Whoever won that fight was going to fight Morel in Wisconsin, and that's what ended up happening. Anyways, and then he moves up again soon after that. After he loses that fight, then he takes a year off, and then he gets another title fight. That's Superfly, and he beats Hideki Todaka, who at that point too was, not like a world beater champion, but a guy that was like a respectable guy and was not expected to lose to an ancient guy in Gamez. Gamez loses it soon after that, but think about it too, man. He's still going at it up until 2005. And in 2002, the last dude I'll bring up, he fights Johnny Bradell, this is the Bantamweight Championship now, you know what I mean? Like, and Bradell was a dude who got robbed against Paulie Ayala at one point. You know what I mean? A really tall, lanky dude from Denmark, right?
Yeah.
Awkward guy to fight. Gamez is a small guy. I met him at the Hall of Fame one time. A really, really short spark plug of a guy. So for him to be fighting a dude like Johnny Bradell and holding him close in 2002 is impressive too. So I mean, yeah, that's just to sum it up. I think Gamez gets a little underrated. Sure, he's not one of the top, multi-division champions in boxing history, but to always be like, yeah, automatically he's a scrub in X, Y, and Z is kind of not fair to him either.
Yeah, he definitely was not a scrub, and not only he has something like 15 losses. So I mean, it looks bad. Again, on paper, it's like you're like, oh, this guy's got a lot of losses. But number one, the opposition was very good, and number two, he only got stopped twice. One was in that Kradending Gym fight, which is like wild. You're like, oh, like he had shit well in hand, and then just gets fucking blasted. And it's like, oh shit. And then the other stoppage was a stoppage after he's already 3 divisions up. It's like, how do you only have 2 stoppage wins at that point? But in any case, we're not doing a full-on dissection of his career, but nonetheless, dude, I agree. His status as a multi-division champion, clearly not among the best, but not the worst.
Sure.
Not the worst, that's for sure. Let's see. Who else we got here? You know what? I was gonna go good just to kind of balance things out, but we're not gonna go good. I lied. Unfortunately, I think another guy of somewhat recent years who I think we could bring up as a not very good multi-division champion. And it kind of sucks because he's, at least as far as I know, I haven't seen any updates, but the last update I saw was that he is not in a good place in life. It sounded like Rosendo Alvarez was stepping in and trying to help his countrymen, but Ricardo Mayorga is a guy who, in terms of skill,
yeah,
I actually think he's underrated in terms of skill. Because people are like, oh, he's a brawler, he's unskilled, he's a wild man, he doesn't do anything. I don't think that's true at all. They said the same kind of things about Marcos Maidana, who had very subtle skill. But in terms of his actual opposition and how he won what he won, I don't think it's, I don't think it's super great.
Dude, Mayorga was one of those guys that when he came in the early 2000s, he fit perfectly for that era, because we were still the world was still like, especially America was still a part of that like late 90s scene of like Crash TV and all that shit, and that really hadn't changed. And Mayorga coming in with almost like a more enhanced and more outlandish Roberto Duranish type of machismo that the boxing world hadn't seen in a minute was like perfect, right? Absolutely perfect. And the way he came in too, like Six Heads Lewis was the Andrew Six Heads Lewis was the champion at the time. The welterweight division was kind of in a weird state. You know what I mean? Like De La Hoya had lost to Mosley, and they were kind of going through their thing. And the other champions, they were just treading water because no one was going to fuck with Mosley at that point. Vernon Forrest was trying to, who I'm going to bring up in a minute, was subsequently waiting in the wings as well. But when Mayorga first came on, and the way he the first fight he had was Six Heads Lewis, so it got like ended early. Like I think after like 2 rounds because of like a cut or something. But in that like round and a half that you got to watch Mayorga, you already saw there that there was like a certain type of like animalistic brutality to his style that you wanted to see more of it. Like he was a rugged individual, and you knew that fight was getting good. It's just unfortunate how it ended. But then when he had the rematch and he knocked Lewis's head into the fucking like nosebleed section, I mean, like, oof. And it was cool. Like, I was like, all right, I'm with it. Like you said, he was wild, but there was like a nuance to his style. He wasn't just going in there and swinging for the fences when every punch was coming from the ground or something. Like there was skill. He wait a minute and knew when to attack. He knew when to go in there. But I mean, like he was strong with it. Like you couldn't really predict what he was going to do either. And incredibly too was the fact that like he had good stamina and he had like decent speed and stuff. Even though he's a chain smoker, go figure. But like after he beats Six Heads and he's talking a lot of junk and all this stuff, he gets matched up with Vernon Forrest. Forrest after he had just beaten Shane Mosley twice and is looked upon as like one of the top fighters in the pound for pound. Like this dude was a legit, and even though it was a unification fight, by all accounts, you would probably remember more than I was because I think you were already on the scene kind of back then. Forrest was definitely considered to be the high and dry winner, favorite for that one. Like Mayorga was looked upon to make like an excited fight because of his style, but like Forrest was probably gonna like spectacularly knock him out because of it.
There was actually talk of Forrest moving up and taking on Bernard Hopkins.
Was there?
Yeah. Like
That
not
would
like
have been
negotiations, but
yeah,
like there
that would have been
were
an awful fight.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yes, it would have. But I mean, but point is that that's kind of where people were because Vernon Forrest had defeated Shane Mosley, and in the second fight, was a little shakier than the first, but nonetheless, he defeated him. And Shane Mosley's stature, like pound for pound stature, was high enough that it was like this was a weird time, like there were a number of wins around this time where fighters who were considered high on the pound for pound list were just like had their ass beat. And then it
Sure.
was like the consensus was kind of like, well, then I guess the fighter who beat them takes their place. I don't know why, but that happened in a handful of times. It happened with Hopkins Trinidad because Trinidad was considered like top 2 or 3 pound for pound, and it was like Hopkins whooped his ass. So they were like, well, then put Hopkins 2 or 3, and then same kind of thing with like Zoo Judah because
Sure.
some idiots were calling Zab Judah pound for pound, and then Zoo whooped his ass. I mean, that's a different discussion, but you
Yeah.
get what I'm saying. Similar thing. Vernon Forrest beats Shane Mosley, and people were kind of like, well, then he's the kind of number one or number two or number three or whatever. And so that's kind of the mindset people were thinking. And I was at Forrest Mayorga one, by the way, fucking
Oh, cool.
Pachanga. Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually didn't even see the end sequence because it was right against the ropes, and from where we were, it's a good venue, but it was like Forrest was kind of back and down against the ropes. And then when I saw
Yeah.
it on TV, I was kind of like, hey, dude, Mayorga gave him a hard ass fucking forearm as he's kind of down. That probably should have given him some extra time.
I
So
mean, Vernon had a big forehead too, so
he took that shot. So it's not like a foul set him up or something like that. He got sucked into a brawl and he took that right hand.
mhm.
But similar to Pacquiao Marquez one, where Manny clocked him as he was down,
Yeah.
Marquez should have gotten extra time. In my opinion, Vernon Forrest should have gotten extra time. But regardless, calls are made during when they're made. And so Mayorga stepped up, won that fight. And I remember that shit was wild, dude. Fool's fucking lighting up a cigarette immediately in the post fight interview. At the weigh in, he had 2 slices of pizza actually. He had one in each hand, ate one, and then
Yeah.
was eating the other one as he's weighing in. I remember everybody was going like, "What the fuck? He's gonna miss weight?" No, that was what I think what part of what fucked Forrest up was the dude was just like kind of like Muhammad Ali, and that like he's going all wild and all this type of shit, but he's chilling, he's
Mhm.
making weight. There's nothing wrong. And I think that rattled Forrest a little bit, sucked him into the fight and got him pissed off. And anyway, I actually thought Vernon Forrest won the rematch.
I have not watched that rematch probably since it happened that night. I'm gonna be completely honest. It's just a fight that
It
never
gets
been talked
forgotten
about.
about, and
Yeah,
people kind of just sweep it under the rug, like Mayorga beat him twice, and I'm like, you ought to watch that again, dude. Especially in the late rounds, Forrest hurt him a couple times to the body.
sure.
But anyway,
But
you know,
Mayorga had that style that was always going to give a classic boxer like Forrest kind of issues because
exactly.
Forrest couldn't predict what he was going to do, and
It was a good
it was
contrast.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definite. But after Mayorga did that, I guess now Corey Spinks is on the waiting in the wings, and Spinks was he promoted by King? I have no idea, but like
Yes.
he was.
Yep.
Okay,
Right before that, we were talking about Italian fighters for obvious reasons, and Michele Picarillo was the dude who held that belt, and then
that's
Spinks
right.
had to go fight him twice because he whooped his ass and then got robbed and then had to go back again to go get the belt. And so, yeah, he was. I don't know if Picarillo was, but Spinks was.
Okay. So, anyways, they have that marathon pay-per-view that Mayorga now is going to unify the welterweight championship on against Spinks.
Oh,
And yeah, it's a bad fight. It's a bad fight. But that
the
showed off.
entire show was bad, but that fight did helped contribute to the badness.
Well, the thing is, man, is that like people talk about some of the Don King marathon shows of the '90s, and I get it. Like those fucking shows lasted
Like
forever,
on
and
paper, it was great because it's
but
high quality
yeah,
matchups or whatever. But just the
but
matchups
and the
themselves
two
were
and the
fucking awful.
those ones he did around like 2003 and stuff, the ones where like he was just featuring Rockman and Chris
Yeah,
Bird and all these other,
Kendo and
and like basically everybody that he had like serviced at that point still under contract, he would put on those shows and they just lasted for fucking ever. And that was on one of them. I think it was the first one they did. And so, anyways, like Mayorga, this is when it got really nasty because he had always talked shit about other opponents and stuff like that too. But he got really deep talking about Corey. I think Corey Spinks' mom had just passed away soon before that. Mayorga said something to the effect of he was going to send him to be back with her or something like that, and
yep.
talked a bunch of shit. It was nasty, but as bad of a fight that was, I enjoyed watching it because I thought it was really interesting the way Spinks was able to negate Mayorga. I mean, it wasn't exciting, but like Spinks clearly won that fight and he outboxed the shit out of him. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't
Yeah,
close. People try to say that it was.
it was
And
not a particularly honorable win in the sense that like pretty much any time Mayorga got his hands on him, Spinks was like flailing to the floor and shit like
yeah,
that. And so I mean, it was not like a brave performance at all. But clearly it was a contrast of styles, and it showed that somebody with a more I mean, Spinks didn't have a classic style, but more of a skilled cutesy style was going to give him a lot of shit.
sure. And you know what kind of stinks though is that say Mayorga did win that fight, right? Then Mayorga would have fought Zab Judah next, maybe instead of Spinks. That would have been a fun ass fight.
I mean, yeah, dude, that thing kind of like derailed because Mayorga was supposed to be like the superstar. Corey Spinks was definitely seen as he didn't have much power, clearly, and he was seen as kind of weak, going into that fight. Like, I don't think that a lot of people had a whole lot of and yeah, Mayorga was like the flavor of the day. He was on the cover of the ring. He was smoking and shit like that, and it's I get it. Like it was if it's the same type of thing where if it happened now, like he'd be the fucking Haktua girl of the moment. You know what I'm saying? Like
Sure.
he'd be that guy for a moment. But that was the thing was that like Corey Spinks kind of derailed that shit.
He did. And so he moved up to junior middleweight. That's not when he won another belt.
Hmm.
Who
From
did he beat?
Picarillo, yeah.
Who did he beat for that? He beat
Michele Picarillo, yeah, or Picarillo or
oh,
whatever.
ugh. It's
Yeah,
probably
no, what yeah, in Chicago on the I think that was the that was on the undercard or maybe yeah, it was Rockman Barrett. Ugh.
oh god. Nah, I definitely did not watch that. But yeah, like you know what happened soon after that is that Mayorga transitioned from being a champion and a guy that was looked upon as being the top of the division to being just, anytime one of the top fighters wanted to come back, Mayorga was the perfect foil for him because he was beatable and he was going to sell pay-per-views with all the shit he was going to
Exactly.
talk. And he would make the fights exciting because like he'd get out there and actually do, and try before he'd get beat down or whatever it may be. So when Trinidad came back in early 2000, in late 2004, October 2004, um, that was a big one because like Mayorga, like you said, he hadn't lost since the Spinks fight, but I mean he hadn't been looking amazing either. And then when Trinidad comes back, yeah, it's gonna be a big pay-per-view fight, but like, you know, that was the one I think that really made a downturn in Mayorga because he took some punishment in that fight. Like, yeah, it was exciting. The fact that he ate those fucking bombs in the first round was absolutely stupid. But I mean, for entertainment value, it was great for everyone else. Like, I mean, how crazy is he just sitting there? He's like, pow, takes a hook. And Trinidad, this is the thing is that like his hook is the way he just throws a quick trigger. It was always like scary. The fact that you're letting him just get as much leverage as he wants on it now, basically like when you're playing a video game and when they tell you like to pull the toggle back to get like full like strength when it's like full green and then you release it. That's what you're allowing Trinidad to do to you, which is insane. And I mean, sure, like he took like two of them and act like he didn't feel it, but then you saw his legs start
The
quivering a
second
little
one,
bit.
yeah, the second one,
Like
just
two
a
or
little
three.
bit.
The second one, his legs start moving a little bit. Then that third one, he's just like, okay, this was stupid. Like, kind of readjust. But he still drops Trinidad, and was like back and forth with him until he got stopped. Each time subsequently after that, it got a little bit worse for him. Oscar De La Hoya beat the absolute dog shit out of him.
Yeah, from round one to fucking round six,
Yeah.
just whooped his ass.
And it was a very telling moment too when Mayorga got dropped initially in round one, and the way he looked at Oscar like, "Holy
Yeah, he
fuck!"
got up like, oh, we're doing that?
Yeah, like he wasn't ready for that. He was just like, Eek. But he gave when he fought Shane Mosley. I mean, Mosley was one of those guys that sometimes certain styles could give him issues, and Mayorga's happened to that night, especially that first fight. Mosley didn't look good and was sloppy, until he spectacularly knocked him out in the last round with 1 second left. But so that's what Mayorga was being used at, and there was only one guy, only one fighter that tried to use Mayorga as his little stepping stone to come back in the box and then fucked it up, and that was Fernando Vargas. you know, and that was Vargas's fault too, man. Like that was should have been a layup for him and all that, but this dude always coming in out of shape, all this stuff, had back issues, yabba yabba yabba, and that was horrible. Were you at the first press conference when he got punched in the face by Vargas?
No, but I remember that shit, but no. I
I
didn't
was at
want anything to do with that shit because I was just like, this is a fucking dumbass, like
I was
two
at the second
dumbasses arguing.
I was at the second one at my first press conference ever. It was at held somewhere in the city at this big ballroom place, right? And I see Don King up close for the first time, all the other people walking in, stuff like that, right? And Vargas is already there. People, the media setting up and stuff, and I'm just kind of running around grabbing things for people and doing whatever, right? All of a sudden, Mayorga comes in and loudly points at Vargas and starts talking shit about whatever Vargas, when Vargas sucker punched him in LA, and starts pointing and yelling and blah, 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 blah. And he's right near me too, right? All of a sudden, Vargas does a beeline and starts charging at him. And before I know it, some security guard, because I guess I was in his way, literally picks me up and just kind of places me out to go after them. And I was like, oh shit, growth spurt. Boom. And he just moves. Like he didn't shove me or nothing. He just kind of like, excuse me. And I'm a tiny dude, so I'm just like, oh. And then um nothing happened there, obviously. Like you've seen it, they had that giant board between them, kind of they used for Tyson Lewis, but
Yeah,
well,
the Riddick Bowe, Jorge Luis Gonzalez, fucking
yeah.
plexiglass.
But I mean, you're totally right, dude. Mayorga was one of those guys that like he was fun for the time period, but you knew that type of style in that career wasn't gonna last for it did, and like he took some horrific beatings near the end, and he didn't take care of himself outside the ring either. Like it was funny to watch him smoking cigarettes and eating pizza and doing this dumb shit, but like if you're living that lifestyle 24/7 while trying to be a professional athlete at the highest level, it's not going to work out for you. I don't care how good you are. And you know,
Yeah, and that's why I opened up saying the last I saw I mean, for a while on Twitter and on other social media, there was the photo going around of people pointing and laughing of
sure.
Mayorga sleeping in like it looked like a fucking like front loader or something like
Yeah.
that. Like who knows why? But the last that was several years ago, and the last update that I saw was that he looked like extremely disheveled and looked like he had been on some drugs for several years. And the last that I saw was Rosendo Alvarez, who they were both on an amateur on the Nicaraguan amateur team together back in the day. Um, Rosendo was trying to help him and had found him on the streets and had taken him in and was trying to get him help. But that was like 2 or 3 years ago, man.
I remember that photo of him too. Was he like sleeping on the street or someone something took of him? I don't know.
That's what I was saying was it was like in like the yellow, like the front loader, like the fucking construction thing or whatever that, or
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what it looks like. And but that was from like even before then, is
And
that's what I'm
Alvarez,
saying.
and Alvarez had his own substance abuse issues for a number of years too. I was reading all about his blogs and things happening with him, so I'm
That's why
glad
he
he's
was
cleaned
always
himself
looking
up.
bloated. Yeah.
True. Um, but that's a good one to bring up. So like the next one, I think I'm just gonna do it as a cluster because like talking about them separately would just take way too much time. But when you talk about the four kings, three of them did move up multiple times. So it's worth mentioning them, especially Sugar Ray Leonard, because he's, with his little shenanigans of what he wanted to pull in the 80s, pulled one of the more interesting moves in boxing history back then.
Well, and it brings up briefly the debate of, what do you value more as a fan? Do you prefer, especially since we're talking about multi-division champions, do you prefer a fighter to move up and move up and move up and move up and move up, or do you want a fighter like Marvin Hagler to dominate a division over the course of X amount of years and basically clean a division out? What is better? I don't know. I don't have an answer, but yeah, you have Thomas Hearns, and they were all at some point kind of in a bit of a race amongst themselves. And I think Roberto Duran realized pretty quickly that he hit the ceiling and that he wasn't going to keep going after it the same way. But like, yeah, dude, you have Thomas Hearns and Ray Leonard in particular were kind of neck and neck there for a little while, trying to see who's going to become the fourth, who's going to become the fifth, who's going to win five divisions and that type of shit. But Thomas Hearns probably had the frame. Well, no, he did have the frame to be more effective going up from. He started at 140 pounds as an amateur and
Yeah.
maybe even a lightweight. And the funny thing was not a puncher as an amateur. Scored something like two knockouts or some shit like that as an amateur, like barely any at all. And then stepped into his power as a professional, clearly, but yeah, like going from welterweight, and then I think he went immediately to, he was one of the ones that skipped, right? Like he went to
Who,
like light
Tommy?
heavyweight and then back down, right?
Tommy?
Yeah.
So yeah, he went to welterweight, then junior middleweight, initially tried to win middleweight, then lost, then jumped to light heavyweight, and then went back down to middleweight.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it's welterweight, junior middleweight, light heavyweight, middleweight.
And then he eventually did, I'm pretty sure he did wind up getting super. God, now I'm getting all twisted around, but nonetheless, yeah, see, we're
Oh, he
talking.
did get a. I think he won this WBO super middleweight
I'm
belt or
trying to think
something.
of who it specifically was against
He
now, but
beat Michael Olajide. I think that's
there
who
you
it
go.
was.
Yep, you're right.
And that was like one of the initial WB, like early belts where people were just like, what?
Yeah.
But Emmanuel Stewart apparently was all about the WBO because Tommy fought for their belt. Michael Moore was the WBO light heavyweight champion. Leonzo Barber was the WBO light heavyweight champion. Stewart is like, yo, man, if you have a title you want my guys to fight for, I have no problem calling my guy world champion with your organization.
Well, and he was a manager too, so
Yeah.
he knew that there was something to that it had value. Like
Mm-hmm.
perhaps not to everybody, but to the fighters and to their
Oh,
ability to negotiate and promote themselves, no question. And but regardless of whether you want to honor the WBO or not, clearly going from welterweight and then all the way up to light heavyweight, and eventually he was fighting at cruiserweight, but that was when he was clearly washed. But like you said, Ray Leonard going from welterweight, then junior middleweight, and even going to junior middleweight and winning a title initially, kind of as a leverage, a negotiation tactic for Tommy Hearns, so that he can go into that fight saying he was a two division champion and beat Ayub Kalule going into that fight and whatnot. And then going up even further, but like you brought up the shenanigans, dude, the Donnie Lalonde fight,
yeah.
man, what a sanctioning body wreck, you know?
I mean, the WBC knew what they were doing. Ray wanted to get five, like you said, there was like a race against Tommy, and Ray wanted to get five belts.
Such a petty
And
guy, dude.
yeah, and Tommy was already on that way to doing it. So with the super middleweight division basically still being its like in the beginning phases of it, the WBC was like, oh, I see an easy thing for him. Like, okay, Donnie Lalonde's the WBC light heavyweight champion. Ray doesn't want to fight him at 175, but we'll put two belts on the line. You come down to 168 to fight him, like severely depleting him. And that's what they ended up doing. And I mean, it was a good fight. It was a very fun fight to watch, like, for what it was. But like Ray almost decapitates him at the end. You got to feel bad for Lalonde the way he gets knocked out, man. It was bad.
Especially because he was doing pretty well.
He dropped Ray. He dropped him, and he was like clearly bigger, but he was also depleted too because Ray made him come down. It was like, so I said asterisk. It was crazy. And so he becomes, I guess, people were like arguing it for a long time, but he technically became boxing's first 5 division world champion because of that. How many times in boxing history was two different championships in two different divisions are up for grabs like that? It's usually a guy just moving up and moving down as a champion, but only one title is up for grabs, not both of them.
Yeah,
Because
generally,
yeah,
I was just going to say, generally, when that happened, it was like Henry Armstrong or
sure.
something, somebody who held the multiple titles at
Yeah,
the
yeah,
same
yeah.
time.
But like, why would Lalonde want to go down to 168 and hold a belt that had no fucking motion or anything besides them just beating Sugar Ray Leonard? And he would just vacate and go back to 175. But Leonard, I'll say this though, at least Leonard didn't vacate immediately, like his super middleweight title. I mean, like at that point, like, usually he would win a belt, and besides the welterweight one, he would just vacate it and then retire or do whatever. Now he won this one, and then he fought Tommy Hearns in a rematch, and he fought Duran in a rematch. But in my opinion, I mean, what Hearns did was pretty incredible itself too. But like you said, he had the body for him to be able to do that. For me, Duran, being the smallest guy out of the whole group, and being the one that was around longer than any of them in terms of a career and all that, and being older and all these different things, and how his career panned out in the
Yeah,
80s
he
with
had to
its
figure it out a different way. Yeah.
with its ups and downs and people thinking it was all over and all that. You got to give Durant his flowers, man, because that was like, first off, he was the first one to challenge Hagler out of all the guys that, out of the Kings. And he took Hagler to the fucking limit. Like, out of all those fights, Hagler looked the worst in that one. You know what I mean? Like, Duran is just so savvy and all of that. And if it wasn't for Hagler really pushing on the last round or two, Duran would have won that fight. If it was 12 rounds, Duran probably would have won, right? Because Hagler only won by a point, I think, on each card. Like, it was that close. And what he did to Davey Moore when he moved up to junior middleweight, like, man, again, that was just incredible. Like, he absolutely ravaged his ass. You know what I mean? That was before the Hagler fight. But I mean, at this point, people thought Duran was already done. So this is him doing this, on his like fucking second career now. And then after he loses to Hagler, he gets knocked out by Hearns, and he's like kind of treading water through the mid 80s, wins a few, loses to Robbie Sims, wins another few, might get close one here, blah, blah, blah. Then he fights Iran Barkley in 89. This is what I mean by most impressive. Barkley's a fucking monster at this point, all right? Like, beastly guy, super strong, dwarfs Duran. Duran's 37 and puts on the performance of a lifetime. Like, it's just incredible, man. So when it comes to like, how he moves up and all that, I find that just so impressive compared to like to the others, I guess, just for the longevity of it and what he had to do to overcome those type of things.
He was obviously like, he looked washed.
Yeah.
Like he looked, he had like the kind of junior mullet going. He had the beard. He was like a little thick around the
He
midsection.
was getting a little paunchy near there. Yeah.
Yeah, he clearly was not in the same shape that he used to be. But like, there's that footage of him sparring Nigel Benn leading up to the Barkley fight, and it's
Mhm.
like you could see, like, I mean, the guy, the supreme skill that this dude had, and part of it, yeah, he obviously had a speed advantage, and when he moved up, the guys who were chucking at him were a lot slower than they were down
Sure.
at lightweight. So I'm sure that portion of it is a lot easier, but you're also facing fighters who throw a lot fucking harder, and the consequences of getting hit are a lot higher. And so, the risk is a lot higher. And so Duran had to figure out how to mitigate that damage and how to, like, he was already an inside fighter, but he became a slightly different kind of fighter, a guy who knew how to linger on the ropes a little bit better, who knew how to, pull some tricks in there and shit like that, talk a little bit more shit during the fight to get him out of their game type of stuff. So in that regard, yeah, dude, Duran moving up not just, from lightweight, but through several divisions all the way up to fucking middleweight is it's impressive.
Really is, you know. And then you have a guy like Tommy Hearns who loved moving up so much that there was even briefest of discussions about him potentially fighting Mike Tyson in the 80s because Hearns said he wanted to do it. You know, I've showed you those articles, right, where Hearns was talking to
Yeah.
interviews with you saying that he wanted to fight Tyson and that there was like a slight potential chance of maybe it happening one day if whatever, but luckily it didn't because that would have just ended very badly for Hearns. But you know, the closest he did, he went up to light heavyweight, like you said. He beat Dennis Andreas. He moved back down to middleweight, and then yeah, he after that Hearns, you know, like after the Leonard fight, you know, Hearns always contended out of all those guys. Like Duran was more, I don't know, him and Duran were pretty active. Duran was more active than Hearns was. Like Duran seemed like he was fighting every month at that point, but like Hearns was also too. I gotta give him credit. Like he didn't take himself as a guy that just only wanted big fights. Like he knew he needed to stay active, and plus he was from a different generation where activity was still key to these guys. They weren't worried about just trying to pick up fighting once a year, especially if they're getting older. Like they need to stay active. So there was no problem for Hearns to either be on the USA Network like he was against Earl Butler or another guy, or for him to open up a Don King card like he did for a couple of Chavez ones back in the day in the 90s or something like that. You know what I mean? Like those things didn't, or like a Red Bull show, those things didn't matter to him. And because he was still trying to get another title fight, he was still trying to call out Roy Jones, which was discussed. He was calling out James Toney, that was discussed, you know, and there was a lot of rumors many times over the years where he was about to get a cruiserweight title shot. If you can go through like almost like fucking 5 or 6 years worth of cruiserweight champions that Hearns was supposed to fight at one time or another. You know what I mean? Robert Daniels, fucking Bobby Ches, you know, Ancelet Wamba, or like Orlando North. There was all these dudes at one point or another was scheduled at one was gonna fight Tommy Hearns, and it was either talked about in Ring Magazine or this one. Yeah, the fight's gonna be in September. It's gonna be on Showtime. The fight's gonna be this thing. Nothing ever really came to fruition. I think the closest he did was become like a WBU champion, which don't mean shit, but you know, whatever. And but still, I mean, it's just worth mentioning because like those are just generational talents. I mean, same thing. You can even put Benitez in that group too. Say that Benitez had beat Hamsho, he would have fought her. He would have subsequently fought Hagler. I mean, some people put him in the Kings category or whatever. I don't know who really gives a shit. But again, he was a guy that moved up. He was a junior welterweight, junior middleweight champion. He wasn't a very small. He wasn't a very huge guy, and there he was making middleweights look like absolute shit at some points. So
And still to this day the youngest world champion of all time, which is,
yeah,
it's quite a fucking stat considering he was
that's
like
never gonna
seven.
be broken. I don't think because I don't like can't allow it. It came close once. Came close once. Way back in the day when fuck man, that dude from Panama fought Hector Carrasquilla or something like
Mm,
that. He fought Su Huan Hong, I think. The bantamweight. I was like the for the bantamweight or junior or something like that. Junior featherweight championship. But um that dude was 17, an absolute menace, and almost won. But then he ended up getting stopped. I mean, he would have broken Benitez's record. That was the closest we got.
yeah, it's that kind of achievement's pretty fucking rare, dude, and it's not the kind of thing that's likely to get
Yeah.
broken anytime soon whatsoever. And you could definitely add Benitez into this group if you want to call him Five Kings. No argument, totally fine by me. But that was a feature of four of them. Then four of the five was that they all had multi, divisional titles or whatever. And also with Hearns, there were rumors too, where, well, I don't know, I want to say rumors. I would say more that he was calling out Hagler for a rematch for several years, going up probably to about 1990 or so that I can think of. But by that time, that was when Hagler was starting to, lean far away from boxing and starting to get into the movie business, and he was not interested in that shit anymore, I don't think.
Definitely.
Yeah, dude, that's a good call. And that's a good like forfer, more
Mm-hmm.
than just a twofer. It's a forfer. All right, fine. I'll do good. I'll do one good, and I'll try not to spend too much time so that way we can wedge another one in there before we leave. But
Sure.
I think it's only fitting that we talk about basically the OG multi division champion, a guy that you and I both love to talk about because he's hilarious, great trash talk, one of the hardest punchers of all time, always look like a fucking bald, freckled goober. You
One of your
know,
all-time favorites, man.
he's just great to talk about. That's Bob Fitzsimmons because
Absolutely.
he figures into the history of boxing so well. The history of the heavyweight division, the history of the middleweight division, the history of the early history of the light heavyweight division. And again, like kind of like the OG fucking triple champion, bro.
Mhm. Dude, Fitzsimmons, the thing that people always bring up about him, and it's just the truth, is that like he looks sickly, right? If you see him from the front, he just, super pale, freckly. We talked about the
I
hairline.
wouldn't think twice. Would
Yeah,
not think twice about fighting that guy in a bar.
most people wouldn't. You see him, and he just looked like he was, a guy that was suffering from consumption or something back then, right? And he had the fucking hairline that was all the same, the halo, the whole thing. He just but if you walk behind him and then you saw like how he was built, because you weren't, it wasn't really shown in the front, it was all in the back. And then you were like, oh, damn, where'd that come from? And then you find out he's a blacksmith and a dude who just spends hours and hours and hours taking the thing and just hammering shit all day. And then in his spare time, hammering fucking dudes in the fucking blacksmith mills. Well, at that point, I mean, then you're gonna, depending on how much you drink, you might still want to try to pick a fight with him, thinking, well, he can't be that tough. And then when you wake up a week later with your jaw in 15 different places, well, I mean, you learn your lesson.
We've mentioned it before, dude, but like I worked construction for a few years, not long enough to be one of those dudes.
Sure.
But I remember when I worked construction, it would be like I would like shake hands with somebody and immediately, and I mean immediately, if you're shaking hands with somebody who's like an auto mechanic,
Mm-hmm.
a plumber, like those kinds of like physical labor jobs, your hands are different. Like they have a kind of strength that is not like normal strength. And blacksmithing is similar. Again, I'm not a motherfucking smith. I remember taking metal shop in fucking school, bro.
Sure.
And we used to handle the hammer on the anvil.
Yep.
That shit is fucking like 15 pounds, bro. The hammer. So you're sitting here like even just doing it several times tires your ass out. And this is your job. You're doing it ding, 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 ding all day long. You don't realize the kind of physical strength that the core strength that builds up, dude. And so that's why, yeah, you look at Bob Fitzsimmons, he looks like nothing. He looks like a little frail, sickly guy. And then, yeah, you see his back and you're like, oh shit, that guy's built, bro. His legs, not really. His legs look skinny too. So he looked
Sure.
funny. Back then, people probably weren't thinking twice about fighting him either. I mean, obviously. And, he was like I said, he was a tremendous trash talker, like an eloquent trash talker where he'd like say some shit and just kind of, and he was also kind of, from what I understand, kind of a dick too. Like he was like not the nicest dude. Like you'd kind of like bully people he was around if they like were, you didn't like him or something like that.
I
And
mean, he was from all accounts, well, not only being one of the most scientific fighters in history, but like just having one of the great minds. Everybody from that entire era said that like his mind was just kind of working on a different wavelength than everyone else. So that's maybe why he was like known as being dickish and stuff. You know what I mean? Or maybe
yeah,
being
kind of
a little.
aloof or
That's
something
what I was
like
gonna
that.
say,
Yeah.
aloof or something. Yeah, there's a lot of people like that, and just they're kind of stuck in their own little, in their own world. And what they do, and how it operates, and how they can control it is where they like. And so anyone trying to enter that, they kind of have a little bit of a guard up. I'm like that to a slight degree, but so the thing about him though is that like he could. The thing about Fitzsimmons is that like you look at his career. This guy's career spanned for so fucking long. It started in the 1880s and then it ended in 1914. That's like that's a long, long career, especially for that time period where you basically starting at a bare knuckle still. And then it's transitioning into like the glove era, but there's not really a glove era because like, what do you call them fucking skin tight things that they're wearing? It wasn't shit, you know what I mean?
They
But
used to
like,
refer to him as kid gloves or riding gloves.
sure. But it was the way it started for him. He started out fighting in New Zealand and Australia early in his career and like making a name of himself over there. Um, he was like the evolution of the sport was still like he was a big part of that. Like he watched from the Sullivan era because he was, active while Sullivan was still champion. And, some of the guys still around from that time period to where Jack Johnson happened because he ended up fighting Jack Johnson at one point at the very end of his career. So it's like, think about that and like how much that encompasses. And not only that, too, a guy like Fitz Simmons, he was one of those dudes who stood out from the rest from that era, too, because he wasn't one of those guys who just was like one of those brutish people from back then. You know what I mean? Like with that style that was like, all right, take three to land two and whatever it may be. You know what I mean? Oh, just showing my toughness. Like there was scientific finesse with him, besides just being an absolute maniac with his fists. So like he was always thinking ahead and like what body parts hurt and like pressure points and this and that and how much pressure to put onto a punch to like put maximum damage to your gut or to over here or this and that. Like there was he was very well aware of that shit. So by the time he fights the original Jack Dempsey non-Perio for the middleweight championship, this guy was considered at that point like fucking superstar of boxing, and in the sport. Like yeah, Sullivan was considered the heavyweight champion and thus the most popular man on the planet. But like when it came to pure talent or just being a great fighter, Dempsey was probably looked upon as being the overall better dude. Like this guy was washing everybody. And by the time Fitzsimmons got him, dude, Fitzsimmons fucking thrashed his ass. Like, by all accounts, he beat the fucking daylights out of him, knocked him completely unconscious, and everyone was just kind of like, holy Jesus, like, who is this guy? And by the time he moves up to heavyweight, in the thick of the division now, Corbett had been champion. Sullivan has now retired. But like you feel like this new era was coming because like the Sullivan era, like we talked about, it was still like stand up and the whole thing. And like now you're seeing a guy like Corbett really showing things that the world hadn't really seen before. You got Fitzsimmons who's doing that. You got guys like Joe Kowinski and all the ones who coming up, and they're showing a different side of Peter Jackson, of course. They're showing a different side of boxing that the world had not seen at this point. And Fitzsimmons being right in the thick of it and the power that he exhibited was able to excel. So I mean, he's taking these heavyweights that are like going tit for tat and like really, having these long attritions and beating the shit out of them. Guys like Tom Sharkey knocking him in the fucking next Wednesday, fighting a guy like Kowinski, like you said, knocking him out. Kowinski hated him for the rest of his life for whatever happened in that fight. Always made sure to talk shit about it. The other dude, Rulon, Gus Rulon, is it?
Yeah, Gus Rulin, yeah.
Yeah, all these type of fighters. I mean, these guys came a little bit after Fitzsimmons would lose his title to Jeffries, but I mean, these are the thick of the dudes he was like getting in there with too. You know what I mean? By the time he fights Corbett, Corbett's looked upon as like the fancy Dane and the all whatever and all this bullshit. But like, it's one of those fights. We had the footage of what it is. And I mean, there's been people that have altered it enough that we can. It's made it watchable today. Put it that way. Because at first there was no way to even watch it, and even the knockout, you still can't do it. It's kind of like various small little clips kind of put together to make it look like what could have happened. But like what you
Yeah,
watch,
it's not a clean clip at all.
not the clean clip at all. But what you see before that, though, and you see what Fitzsimmons is doing to Corbett is pretty fucking impressive.
He's measuring him. He's clearly trying to, corner him and work him into position.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably one of the most impressive things about Fitzsimmons is, like you said, his longevity. Not
Yeah.
just the longevity itself, but like the kind of transitions that he saw in the evolution of the sport that he experienced when he was. So he was from Cornwall,
Mm-hmm.
which is in England, and it's a really like it's on the southern, I believe, southwestern coast of England, and
Yeah.
it's like it's cold, windy, rocky, icky, like not pleasant. England's already like not a super pleasant place in terms of fucking geography and weather. And this is like one of the least pleasant places. And he went from there to New Zealand and then eventually Australia. And when he wound up in Australia, he was in place. Larry Foley is the guy who took Fitzsimmons under his wing, and Larry Foley was kind of like the hero of of Australian boxing or whatever, and some consider after Jem Mace one of like the forefathers or whatever of Australian boxing. And the reason why is because the same stable that Fitzsimmons trained out of had Frank Slavin, Peter Jackson,
Mm-hmm.
Young Griffo, right there. That's four of the greatest fighters who ever fought out of Australia. And so, again, easily one of the forefathers of Australian boxing. And so and that is going back into the fucking 1880s. Like you said, we're already skipping forward almost 20 years. So much had happened in boxing and its development, its legality, etc., that it's just, it's amazing that he lasted through then. And then by the time that he got to the heavyweight and light heavyweight divisions, people thought he was done. He looked old. Everyone thought he was creaky and rickety and shit. Everybody found out the wrong way that motherfucking old man still had some power in those hands.
Bro, I love reading accounts about people, about fighters from that era talking about Fitz Simmons, talking about him, if whether they fought him or they knew him or whatever. And like I said, some of them didn't like him. Joe Kowinski did not like him.
Yeah, Corbett fucking hated him too.
Corbett hated him too. Fuck Corbett, all right, man.
Yeah, racist dickhead.
Just because Fitzsimmons planted his fist all the way into his gut, almost through his back, he wanted to be all salty the rest of his life, man. Take you and your ashy ass cheeks.
Yeah, why are you forcing me to watch your ass when you fight, jerk?
All the time, man. Who was he trying to impress in the front row? All right. Well, anyways,
Daisy Duke, motherfucker.
yeah. This is not a pro Corbett show. Put it that way, people. But anyways, like Kowinski didn't like him. There was an interview on boxing.com, that old website that unfortunately went to the wasteland years ago, that they used to have a lot of good history shit on it. That's why I used to like read. But anyways, they were talking, Kowinski was talking. This is late in life too. This dude has cancer. He's like sick. He's in between like coughs and shit, but he's just all there. They said that he got all this energy talking about how much he hated Corbett. How much he hated Fitzsimmons. This is the 1950s, by the way, too, right? You know what I mean? Or like the late 40s or something. So like Kowinski, he'd been around, and Fitzsimmons had been dead for decades.
Yeah, for like 2-3 decades.
Yeah, and he was like, I'm telling you right now, you could never trust him. Always had to watch your pockets. He was a really sneaky guy. He was this and that. Watch the Gus Rulin fight. He fucked around and blah, blah, blah. And Rulin got, shit, listen, like all he did was talk shit and just said how he couldn't stand him. He's a cur. He's this, like using all these old timey like insults about him. And then you have another dude like Kid McCoy, who, one of the more dark figures in boxing history, I suppose, and interesting to read about, was from that time period as well. And was another interesting mind, I guess, to put it that way, because he was another guy that was like looked upon, that acted different, thought different, clearly did, considering what he did later on in life. But he always talked about being with Fitzsimmons and saying that Fitzsimmons was the only guy that had a higher IQ than he did when he came in the ring. And they said they was always trying to pick his brain, and that Fitzsimmons, when they would work out together, Fitzsimmons noticed that he was always trying to pick him and all that. So he would work on that. Like they were almost like playing mental chess. And that he said anytime that when they were working together, he thought he had something or he thought he figured something out, Fitzsimmons would throw another wrinkle into it.
Yeah, he wouldn't go 100. He'd go at like 85. And then when he thought he had him at 85, he'd be going like, let's go 100 now. Like, oh shit. Like you got a whole new thing that I haven't seen.
Exactly. That's what he said. He said that every time he thought he had something, Fitzsimmons would just show a little trick out of his lair that he didn't even know about, that he's just kind of like, and then Fitzsimmons would kind of smirk at him like, you think you got me, bro. Like, I always got something up my sleeve on you. Like, don't try that.
Yeah. And you know what, dude? And that's one of the you and I have talked about this away from the show on multiple occasions, and I think we pretty much agree that, often people will call James Corbett like he's like the father of modern boxing and shit like that. Sure. Fuck that. Bob Fitzsimmons is a lot closer to that than James Corbett, and there are other fighters who qualify even before that anyway. George Dixon, you and I have talked about, dude. Come on, get out of here with this Corbett shit. He just was showing his literal ass. So, but I think Bob Fitzsimmons, though, clearly, because that's what a lot of people talked about, is that he wasn't Ricardo Mayorga. He wasn't just swinging. You know what I'm saying? This dude was setting up the power. It wasn't about just stepping in and throwing power from the hip or whatever. It was about precision. It was about setting up a knockout. It was about landing precisely and knocking dudes out cold, because you got them measured for that one shot. It took you fucking 24 rounds, but you got him measured for that one shot and eventually landed it. And obviously, though, one of the downfalls for Fitzsimmons, and we just haven't gotten to it yet as far as the heavyweights especially, is that he never really got above about 170 pounds. And even then, it was like what he was topping out at. He was not a big dude. He was more closer to like 155, 160 at his best. And, and we didn't even talk about really his middleweight exploits where he knocked out the non-imperial Jack Dempsey, who was at that point
Yeah,
considered pound for pound, like they talk about pound for pound. They didn't
yeah.
use that term, but they talked about Jack Dempsey moving up and knocking out John L. Sullivan because they, in terms of the skill, they were like, there's no comparison. Jack
Mhm.
Dempsey's so much better than John L. Sullivan that he could potentially move up and knock him out at heavyweight. So in any case,
He
that
used to
was the
challenge him all the time too. Dempsey did.
yeah, Sullivan just ignored everybody. He just ignored everybody except for Jack Daniels. And basically, fucking
Yeah.
yeah, Fitz Simmons talked about that too. Fitz Simmons threatened to go up and whoop some ass himself. But
Well,
just
before we switch to I guess the last guy, it should be noted you're talking about John L. Sullivan. Sullivan was supposed to fight Fitzsimmons at one point. Remember, like to the point where it was completely set up. Both guys got in the ring, and then like the police intervened, and it really sucks, man. Because I've said it before. Bob Fitzsimmons would have beat the absolute brakes off of a
he
fucking
probably would have taxed the
John.
shit out of that
He
fat
would have beat
fucking
his ass badly. Like this
that
was a
pudgy
comeback in
bastard.
Sullivan. Sullivan had come back, I guess, for the be like an exhibition, and it was against a legit fighter, like a legit heavyweight at the time. And Sullivan knocked him out, like kind of surprisingly, knocked him unconscious. You know what I mean? And all the people ringside seeing that were kind of hushed at first, and then they got hyped because this is like a guy there that was their idol still, right? And then Sullivan did the same thing he used to always do. After he knocked a person out, he challenged anybody to like, a side bet and this and that if he can go 5 rounds with him and all this type of shit. And everyone's like, oh man, John L's back. And so the first person they were going to fight is Fitzsimmons. And I was reading about that on some message board on BoxRec. And I mean, the guy who wrote about it was like a whole thorough thing. Like it was definitely legit. And I'm just like, fuck, man, that just would have, I wish I could have read in the history books how just like Fitzsimmons had him laying out there unconscious bleeding.
Or after several rounds, just
Yeah.
that
That wouldn't have gone several rounds. Fitzsimmons would have punched him in his gut like twice, and his spleen would have ruptured.
Yeah, again, another thing we've talked about away from the show is just how, dude, yeah, I'm sure that in his absolute prime, John L. Sullivan was a physical marvel or whatever, but that time period was extremely short. And we know because we have photos of it.
Yeah.
The dude, in like in that photo of him in the overcoat sitting at the table, like he looks svelte, he looks like he's in great shape. And then there's like maybe one photo of him shirtless where he looks in great shape. Every other photo, the fool's got a fupa like a motherfucker and a camel toe. Every fucking photo, bro.
Uh, yeah,
Sorry.
man, I love
Fitzsimmons would have whooped his ass.
I do, man. I love Fitzsimmons. He's one of my favorites out of the contemporaries back then too. I mean, I'm not gonna say that he probably didn't hold some kind of prejudices. They all did back then, but like I don't, he's out of all those heavyweights back then. I've never really read many accounts about him just blatantly dropping n bombs about this guy and that one and all this other stuff going around. Like he kind of think he was more into like walking around with his pet lion who had a tendency to either attack him or other people and dealing with his going ons of his wife.
There's like dozens of newspaper reports of his lions biting people, dude.
I mean,
Including him. Including him. He got bit on the hand and got a really bad infection.
imagine walking down the street, or if back in the day, right, and you see Battle and Siki with a parrot on and a pet lion walking towards you, probably drunk too. And I'm just like, I wouldn't know what to do. I'd stare and probably run across the street. I wouldn't know how to fucking handle that. Same thing with Fitzsimmons. You see him in a top hat and a suit, and he got his lion over there in his cage, and he probably top of the morning to you. Wait, what?
Except for he would literally travel around with his lions. Like he brought them everywhere.
Interesting guy, man. There has to be books on him, but
Well, there is again, there are a lot of free resources, people. You guys never really listen to me. Google Books has a free Bob Fitzsimmons book that's worth a read. It's kind of tedious. I can't remember the dude who wrote it. It was a writer who followed him in camp for like a few months or something like that, and then wrote a book about it. It's pretty fun. It's a good read, but there are some books, but not
boxing's
enough.
yeah, boxing's first 3 division world champion, and a guy too that after he moved up, he moved down to become champ too. So um, last dude I'll bring up, I guess, like I was gonna bring up Mickey Walker originally, but we've talked about him on the show. And even though Walker was only a 2 division champion, the fact that he moved up to heavyweight was just like fucking awesome to me. You know what I mean? Like that was Actually, that's why I'm gonna bring up because I was reading about him the other day. I was gonna say Baby Jack McLalla, but we talked about like lower weight fighters earlier and stuff. So Walker, he's another one of my favorites from that time period. I was like I've been reading the 30 Great Peter Heller's book recently again, especially going back in the early days and going through that and like the 1920s was just one of those eras in boxing. That was a golden age, you know what I mean? Like a really and golden age in sports in general. You know what I mean? You had guys like Babe Ruth in baseball. You had when was Jim Thorpe in football? I don't know. Was
Yeah.
that back then?
Yep.
Jim Thorpe?
Yep.
Okay. So you had like Jim Thorpe, you had Babe Ruth. I don't know who was a racer back then. I'm sure you had car racers, and then you had Dempsey as the heavyweight champ. You had Dempsey as the heavyweight champion. Harry Greb for a time as the middleweight champion. Pancho Villa was around as the flyweight champions. I'm talking about like the biggest stars of the eras around this time. You know what I mean? Benny Leonard as the lightweight champion, and so on and so forth. And Mickey Walker arguably was one of the, besides Dempsey, because no one was going to surpass Dempsey's popularity, was probably the most popular fighter of that era, besides maybe Greb.
Yeah, the only athlete who was really well, maybe I would say two athletes that were even coming close to touching Babe Ruth and Jack Dempsey were Bobby Jones and Ty Cobb.
Okay, yeah, Ty
And
Cobb's, yeah,
and Ty Cobb was more of a Georgia, like they loved him in Georgia, and he was a Georgia native, so they like he was like the biggest star in Georgia and in the South or whatever. And Bobby Jones was also a massive golf star, but again, it didn't quite compare to these other mega stars.
yeah,
But yeah, dude, Mickey Walker, eh, you're talking about the pinnacle of popularity when you're talking about Jack Dempsey. So it's almost kind of like not fair
yeah.
because you remember that like you talk about like Henry Armstrong, we were talking about him earlier, and he was a massive star himself, except for the problem was that Joe Louis was also fighting at the same time. So
Mhm.
Joe Louis was a way bigger star, but Henry Armstrong was a massive star. Fucking Harry Greb, massive star. It's just that Jack Dempsey was around the same time and a way bigger star. So people, Harry Greb's notoriety gets downplayed. Similarly, Mickey Walker around at the exact same time and after Jack Dempsey's retirement, which helped Mickey Walker a little bit too. It kind of boosted his popularity because Jack Dempsey had retired and Mickey Walker was a known ferocious, swarming, aggressive fighter similar to Dempsey. And so for that in that regard, Mickey Walker, very very popular guy at the time.
And just an awesome fighter to watch. I mean, first off, he has one of the best nicknames in boxing history. He was called the Toy Bulldog, and it worked for him because he always said because he had a pug nose. That it was like from when he was young, just getting smashed all the time and stuff. And like he was just a small guy. Like he wasn't tall and lanky like a Tommy Hearns, or he wasn't built like kind of lanky like Sugar Ray Leonard. He probably even more stout than Duran, I think, but kind of built that same way.
He had
Short,
massive legs,
yes, short,
huge
stocky,
legs.
and thick. And just a dude who was going in there was gonna rumble with your ass, like strong as absolute fuck. Couldn't really hurt him that much. Like, yeah, he could be knocked down, but you weren't gonna knock his ass out. And was just bad as shit. Like, besides him, he wasn't a and again, like everyone thinks, oh, is the way he's built or has to be. Like, he wasn't a wild brawler. There was like nuances to his game. It just worked well with his aggressive style that a lot of guys couldn't compete with him.
Just an absolute like just I apologize for using this word, a crippling body puncher,
Yeah,
absolute fucking terror. Like I said, massive legs, like you could go watch video. There's actually some pretty good video of him available, thank goodness. And you could
yeah.
see that he was a very entertaining fighter. There was nuance to his game. He wasn't just a brawler. He moved his head quite a bit and had good power, not awesome power, but good power. And yeah, just a really entertaining guy. He was initially called the Rumsen Bulldog and then
Hmm.
called the Elizabeth Bulldog because he's from Elizabeth, New Jersey. And then I think Rumsen is another place outside of New York. Anyway, they were always coming up with nicknames and shit like that for dudes. But yeah, he started out at welterweight and was not considered a massive welterweight either. Like he was like a little welterweight. They called him the toy bulldog.
Hmm.
So the fact that he was able to not only go from welterweight and mostly dominate at welterweight in a good deep era, went up to middleweight and had a lot of success at middleweight. in another good deep era, and
Mm.
then went up to heavyweight, and it took a fucking like multi-round ass beating from a future world champion in Max Schmeling to get him to stop.
And
Like an epic ass kicking. Like Schmeling like taxed him like repeatedly over and over and over till people ringside were like, "Stop it, please! He's already dead." Fucking stop.
it's crazy too because if you go on BoxRec or just anywhere and look up his record, it's littered with a who's who of that era from every division. Like he didn't duck anybody. He wanted to smoke with them all, and he fought
Yeah,
them all.
even lightweights.
Yes, and he beat the majority of them. You know what I mean? Like he fought Luke Tendler, like you said, lightweights. Yeah, he fought Luke Tendler, who was one of the great lightweights, one of the great fighters who never won a world championship. He beat Jack Britton for the welterweight championship. Jack Britton never gets talked about today, but that guy had incredible. I mean, how many fucking fights did he have? I don't even like close,
One
three
of the
over
few with
300.
over 300, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
over 300 fights. Only was stopped, I think, once in his career, early on. Absurd
that's
boxer. You know what I
nuts.
mean? Insane, yeah. And Walker beat him by decision. You know what I mean? To beat the belt for that. And Walker, even too, as a welterweight, was still catching losses. He lost to Dave, he lost to Jock Malone, and he lost to a few others. But like, he was still. That's what they were doing back then. They're trading wins and losses. Like, if you were going to be a fucking champion of best of your division, you were going to lose at some point against one of these guys because you fought them multiple times. But like you said, he stood at welterweight for a little bit, but then he loses it to after he loses it to a guy named Pete Latzo. He moved up to middleweight, and Harry Greb is the king of the middleweight champion, is the king at middleweight right now. You know what I mean? In a similar style as Walker and similar temperament too. Like they were kind of the same person outside the ring. You know what I mean? Wild, just wild. Always
Very
look.
1920s guys for sure.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, they lived as hard in the ring. They lived as hard outside the ring as they did inside the ring. They didn't give a fuck. You know what I mean? That's all they were about. And
Like the Great Gatsby, only actually fucking cool because the Great
yes,
Gatsby's dumb as fuck.
you basically put the nail on the head on that one. And their fight, by all accounts, is one of the better. It was an incredible fight, and apparently it was filmed. And I think that's like the holy grail for everybody. I mean, anyone wants any type of Greb footage, but that's the fight. If you were gonna watch one, it would be a clear footage of Mickey Walker and Harry Greb for the 15-round fight because that's just as good as it gets. And he loses a competitive decision to Greb. I mean, again, Walker is basically fighting his contempt, like his mirror image. But Greb is bigger, Greb throws more, and Greb is just more of an aggressive maniac than Walker could be. And obviously, and when it comes to that, no one was going to be able to beat Greb during that time. Greb was on another level. But they also have a fight outside of there too, outside of the ring later on that night. Like you said, to encompass what the 1920s were, and both of them just being maniacs. After the fight, they said they ended up at a nightclub and they were drinking together. They both had their girlfriends or whatever, but they were ignoring them and they're just drinking champagne and getting absolutely blasted. From what Walker says, they never actually talked about the fight while they were getting blasted. They were just talking about everything else in between and just having a good old time. When they got up to leave, that's when Walker decided to say something about the fight, and he was like, Harry, if you didn't thumb me or didn't do this and that, I would have beat you that night. He's like, I would have beat you tonight. And both of them being drunk, Greb got very offended very quickly, and he goes, and according to Walker, he goes, "Why, you stupid big bum?" He's like, "I could beat you with no hands. Let me show you." And he starts taking off his jacket. And Walker says, that's a sucker punch when you hear it. And Walker says he waited till Harry was over, like his elbows were there, so his hands were kind of locked in, about to take it off. And Walker hit him with an uppercut right there. And he said Greb went flying into the trash. That was it. He said Walker picked him up and then they stumbled off together.
There are various accounts, not various, there are a handful of accounts of what happened.
Yeah.
Some people believe that it's all bullshit and nothing happened. I don't know. Might have, might
Who knows?
not
But
have.
I mean, with
I
those
don't
two
know.
together hanging out,
But
I
it's a
can
great
absolutely,
story.
sure. And it's
So
very
who cares?
plausible, those two hanging out, right? Think about it. Both of them were fucking hard drinkers. Both of them were partiers. Both of them just got done fighting each other and they're hanging out together. The chances of them reigniting their feud at 3 a.m. is a very high. So whatever. But
I know for certain that there was at least two firsthand accounts. For instance, Doc Kearns wrote about it in his memoirs that he sold to Sports Illustrated.
okay,
And then also Mickey Walker wrote about it in his autobiography.
sure.
And I mean, they give pretty similar accounts. Which is pretty much what you said, that Harry Greb, they started talking shit and Harry Greb started taking off his jacket and that he hit him and then they kind of wrestled around for a minute and then that was it. And then they went off like somewhere else to go drink or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And that was it. That was it. But I mean, like I said, whether it's true or not, like to me, that's not even really important. Who cares? It's a great story. And so what? But the point is that that also, that was one of Harry Greb's last big fights.
It was, yeah.
And then he was dead not too long after that. And that left a major gap in the middleweight division and in boxing in general for Mickey Walker to step on in.
He did, and so he beats Greb's successor, Tiger Flowers, a criminally underrated fighter from that time period.
Which I'm just gonna say real quick. Supposedly,
Yes,
Flowers' win over Greb was a massive robbery, and then supposedly going into Walker versus Flowers, according to Walker and Hearns, they convinced Tiger Flowers' manager, I believe his name was Walk Miller, that
yes.
that he was sick and that he had tuberculosis or some shit like that, and so he was sick, and so he wasn't gonna be able to fight hard. So just give us this shot because this is our last shot. He's dying. He's a dying child. And so then they give him the shot, and then he winds up getting supposedly a bullshit decision over Tiger Flowers.
That's what I've read too. And there's no recordings of the fights or anything like that, unfortunately. But yeah, Flowers unfortunately too dies soon after under similar circumstances that Greb did. But Walker was middleweight champion, and he was a very popular middleweight champion too, who fought like some good contenders like Ace Hudkins and others, and Tommy Milligan, and guys of that era beat them all. So at that point, where else is there to go? Like he's not even a big middleweight. He's small. He already looks kind of pudgy at that point. But he had always mentioned that lighter guys gave him issues because those are the guys that are quick, he said, in the street, and everything else is the smaller guys because you got to catch them and they're shifty and all that. Bigger dudes are always easier to fight because they're slower and you can time their punches and do whatever you got to do with them. And so Walker, and now at this point too, you got to think about it. Mickey Walker has been a pro since. Let me just make sure I got the thing over here since like 1919 or some shit. Yep, been a pro since 1919. This man now, he's been a pro for over a decade, has been a welterweight and middleweight champion, mixed it up with an incredible amount of talent in that time period. If some people were just about to call it in and say, okay, that's my career and that's it, no one would even try to bat an eye and say, good job. You know what I mean? Instead, Walker decides in the early 1930s, he's going to move to heavyweight, of all places. And that's what makes him so remarkable to me.
And actually, you missed one quick step in that supposedly the split nature of this verdict was bullshit and that Loughran actually clearly beat him, but according to the reports. But he went up and challenged Tommy Loughran, who was a
That's
fucking nightmare at light heavyweight, and who was the light heavyweight champion for a few years in the 1920s. Went from Berlin-Bach to, or no, from
Jack
Loughran to Berlin.
Delaney. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was like Jack Delaney, Berlin-Bach, and then Mateague was there at one point, but I think, and then obviously Loughran became there.
and Loughran was just a supreme pain in the ass. Not a very good puncher, but an incredibly good jabber, good mover, and somebody who would tie you up super quickly and was just a nightmare. And nonetheless, Mickey Walker took a couple rounds from him and, came close enough to winning the light heavyweight championship. However, was doing well enough late in the fight that there was speculation that had it been a 15-round fight, that it could have been a different outcome, but it was a 10-round fight because that's all that Pennsylvania allowed at the time, or Chicago or wherever it was, Illinois, that they allowed at the time. But that being said, I think it became clear that Mickey Walker was even fighting for light heavyweights, 165 pounds. He never really gained weight. He just stayed at like 165, 170 and moved up to heavyweight.
By the time he fights heavyweights, bro, it's like the heavyweight division too. Like, we talked about the evolution of these guys from the Sullivan time and all of that. By the time the 1930s start rolling around, these are giants compared to what they looked like back then. Like Jack Johnson compared height wise to them, and you had a few otherwise maybe in similar size, but like these were big boys. You know what I mean? Like it's definitely a clear difference than what you would be like, okay, Fitz Simmons coming in at 165 and being heavyweight champion or some shit like that. Like, nah, this dude was rolling in with a guy like Bearcat Wright, who was a clean 210 pounds, Jack Sharkey, who was 200 pounds, Johnny Risco pushing 195. You know what I mean? Like, these were big guys, like King Levinsky, Paulino Yukazandum. Like, these were legit heavyweights. And the one
And
that
then
really,
Bearcat Wright also, sorry to interrupt you, but the father of wrestler Bearcat Wright.
yeah, that's right. Yep. And we talked about that time on the show, because his dad obviously taught him how to throw hands. um, became a champion that refused to lose his belt until they sent out Judo Gene LaBelle to take it from him. And he decided, you know what? I don't need to deal with a sneeze.
Send out Judo Gene if you ever want somebody to fucking act right.
Like he thought he was gonna be wrestling, not to veer off track, but he thought he was gonna be wrestling again, a guy he had already beat up, the legendary Freddie Blassie. Because like he had already double crossed Blassie and broke his mouth and stuff like that. So he thought he was gonna be wrestling Blassie again. Instead, they sent out
By
Judo.
God, is that Judo Gene LaBelle's music?
And he's like, you know what? Okay, keep the
You
belt.
keep this belt.
Yeah.
I'm good.
But so Bearcat Wright was a massive, massive heavyweight back then. Like just big ass dude. I'm not gonna say that like he was an incredible fighter, but like he was a definite contender of his time period, and a person that like was in contention for the belt, but being black certainly wasn't gonna help his chances of ever fighting for one back then. But really tough guy. And the fact that Walker moved up so much smaller than him and everything like that and was able to beat him was like incredible. He was like, Wright definitely landed some hands on him, stuff like that. But by the end of the fight, Walker had him hanging on. And so his next fight, he fights Jack Sharkey. And Jack Sharkey, I mean, like, this dude was supposed to be the heavyweight champion at one point. You know what I mean? Like he was the top guy of the late of the 20s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He finished off Harry Wills. He was beating Dempsey's ass until he got caught because he decided to complain to the referee instead of paying attention to the fight. And just generally looked upon as being like the uncrowned champion because of the shit what happened in his first fight with Schmeling. Right? You know what I mean?
That was the fight he was coming out of, and then he would go right back in to win the championship a couple fights
Sure.
later. So it's not like he was washed or anything like that. This was pretty much prime Jack Sharkey. And of
Yeah.
course, going in, you could say that Sharkey was talking shit, dude. He was talking all sorts of shit. He was like, I would never let a middleweight beat me. Like with disdain. Like he was like, I'd never let a like piece of shit beat like he was talking shit, dude. That's not how it went, bro.
And like Walker got on his ass, and it was actually kind of like sad the way that people were just like, wait, what the fuck? Like, Sharkey was expected to beat him badly, and Walker just pounded him. And Sharkey, me, I like to make fun of him. The guy was clearly one of the most mentally, like, he had
weird.
a lot of, yeah, he was a very, very weird guy. You know what I mean? And the fact that he let a dude like Mickey Walker just bully him around the ring for 15 rounds the way he did was pretty bad. And the fact that Sharkey got a draw out of it when everyone thought that Walker won was like, the main thing too, because I think it was the referee, Arthur Donovan. He's the one who scored it wide enough for Walker. When he heard the other scores, he kind of looked, he was like, wait, what? He was like, what did you guys see that I'm in the middle? I didn't notice because like I saw fucking Walker beat his ass. And considering that Sharkey was again the consensus #1 heavyweight, or even the uncrowned champion, and Walker just basically beat his ass and really, really put him at like, oh wow, this is it. This guy's a legitimate heavyweight. So, he treads water a little bit, but then by the time he fights King Levinsky, another guy by that time who was a top heavyweight of that era, and then Paulino Yucasadon, who probably, was on I would say he was probably getting on the back end a little bit, right? He was a little bit older because he came from like the late 20s. I mean, all those guys did, like, you know what I mean? And so all of them big ass wins, just like back to back to back to back, He loses to Johnny Risco, but again, Johnny Risco is just another heavyweight that's been around forever, so there's no real loss in that. But like you said, had he beat Schmeling, he would have had a rematch with Schmarky. So in between all those fights, right, after he loses the draw with Sharkey, and Sharkey ends up beating Schmeling for the belt in a rematch. Now Schmeling's on the comeback trail. They get matched up, and like you said, bro, it's bad. It's one of the more vicious beatdowns that's been filmed from that time period. And Walker's game is shit. Don't get me wrong. Like he tries and he lands early on, and he's kind of competitive, but like Schmeling just starts beating the absolute dog shit out of him, and like one of those dudes that Schmeling he's underrated today, I would say. So I mean, like, he's obviously just remembered for the Joe Louis thing, and like he's the only heavyweight champion to ever win the title on a foul still to this day. And he is, right? I don't think anyone else has.
Right. Well, I was gonna say Holyfield, but he didn't win the title though. He retained it on
Oh,
a
yeah,
DQ. So
yeah.
yeah, that doesn't count. But yeah, I would think so.
Okay, so like he got, but if you watch him today, man, that dude was a murder. I don't want to use that word. He was a monstrous puncher, absolute monstrous puncher, especially with his right hand. And people kind of compared him to Dempsey back then a little bit, and he even looked like Dempsey a little bit facially. I mean, like,
That was the joke, is that like when
yeah,
he first rose up, they took photos of him and Dempsey sitting together, and like that was the whole look, oh, they're twins, thing.
yeah. But like that was just a bad beating, and that basically finished Walker as a top guy too. Like even first as heavyweight and just in general, because I mean, like he still. Don't get me wrong, he was still able to beat Maxi Rosenblum at one point after that, but like he fought Rosenblum for the light heavyweight championship, lost a wide decision. Fought Lou Brilliant, who was the future middleweight champion. Like at this point, he went back down in weight. You know what I mean? He realized there was once he got beat down by Schmeling the way he did, it was like, all right, there's no reason for me to stay here. I think I reached my limit. But he was past it. It's the mid 30s. He's been a pro since 1919. Now he's starting to be used as a guy, as a name for their record, as opposed to being a top guy. You know what I mean? Like I said, you had Lou Brilliant, and then you also had young Corbett 3, who was a fucking welterweight champion. You know what I mean? Welterweight, and then moved up to middleweight and was still a bad motherfucker in himself. But like these were the guys he was losing to. All Hall of Famers, but like, Walker just wasn't there anymore.
Yeah, the combination of gaining weight and then finally he was trying to fight slightly lighter and make the middleweight limit
Yeah.
again for a little while. The combination, and that almost never works out well. The combination of that and living a fast lifestyle,
Yep.
that wound up being basically his undoing, along with especially that Schmeling ass kicking, dude. It was bad. And I mean, he had a long career, he had a storied career and a two division, nearly a three division world champion. And I mean tough divisions too, not just like, cherry picking belts here and there, which is exactly why he's still rated so highly to this day.
1,000%. And I think I mentioned this on another show before when we've talked about mythical matchups. He's one of the few fighters I've noticed in any type of like anytime he gets put into a mythical matchup, he's always picked as the winner. And like emphatically, usually. Like I remember they matched him with Whitaker, they matched him with De La Hoya and other ones, and usually he ends up by a knockout. And they always say near the end that like he'd be smiling through their punches and then just walking and just ground them down to dirt. Which he probably would have.
Yeah, well, at welterweight, there wasn't really anyone laying it on him like that. So it was, so I mean, and on top of that, that's his style is a great contrast for a lot of great welterweights. So yeah, man, who's holding him off? Not a whole
Yeah,
lot of people from history,
sure. So
no question. Look, we went through a bunch of champions, dude.
yeah, this was fun.
Some good, some bad. Uh, I guess I don't necessarily have a rooting interest. I like Terence Crawford.
Sure.
And so I guess on some level I would like to see him win, just because I would like to see the continuation of his stardom and whatnot. And I think that overall it's good for boxing, which makes it all the more frustrating that he hasn't fought even more.
Mhm.
But nonetheless, seeing him move forward is a good thing, I think, overall. But generally speaking, as a fan, I want to see a good fight. I want to see an entertaining and competitive fight. So hopefully we can find
So
some middle ground between all of this. But I appreciate it, dude. Thanks so much for taking the time, because I do a
always,
little research.
always, this is always a lot of this is always the blasphemy. So
Hell yeah, bro. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening in. We appreciate you. If you listened in on the podcast apps, go ahead and subscribe, leave a comment and rating. We appreciate those things. If you watched on YouTube, what's up? I'm sorry you had to look at my face. Go ahead and subscribe on YouTube, leave a comment and whatnot. We appreciate that as well. Social media goes, I mean, I don't really want to answer anybody on social media personally, so sorry. But if you want to talk to the Boxing History account, go ahead. The Knuckles and Gloves account is also on Facebook, Instagram, and those kinds of things. So go ahead and follow us, and yeah, we'll see. Aris,
sounds
we'll
good.
talk soon, bro.
Have a good one, yeah.